Did you just insult my father?" Annie shouted, looking straight into the billionaire's face. A second later, she slammed the neatly folded dish towel down onto the table. The sound of cloth hitting wood was not loud, but it was enough to make the silver cutlery rattle. Richard Whitmore jerked back so hard that the red wine in his glass trembled and nearly spilled. "Good Lord," he roared, one hand clutching his chest. "Where did this girl come from?" The entire dining room of the Carter House Hotel fell silent. Annie Carter, a housekeeping apprentice at Carter House, stood before him in a simple black uniform. Her shoulders were straight, her chin was raised, and her eyes did not look away for even a second. Behind her stood Malcolm Carter, her father, the true owner of Carter House. But that was a secret Richard Whitmore still did not know. Richard stared at Annie for a moment, then let his gaze slide past her and settle on Malcolm. The corner of his mouth lifted into a contemptuous smile. "Is this your daughter?" he asked. Malcolm's voice remained low and calm. "Mr. Whitmore, I am asking you to lower your voice." Richard slowly took a sip of wine. He set the glass back on the table, then smiled as if he had just discovered an amusing little game. "So this is your daughter?" he said. "Well, that explains it. Like father, like daughter. Same low-class blood, same street manners." Annie's hands tightened at her sides. Richard leaned back in his chair, satisfied with the wound he had just inflicted. Then, without taking his eyes off Malcolm, he reached out and tipped over his glass of wine. The red wine spread across the spotless white tablecloth, ran over the edge, dripped onto the polished floor, and splashed between Malcolm's shoes. Richard pointed down at the spill. "All right," he said. "Since the two of you seem so eager to stand here and perform, get on your knees and clean it up." Malcolm did not move. Annie looked at the wine spreading across the floor, then lifted her eyes to Richard. "You did that on purpose?" Richard's smile widened. "Yes, I did. And you think my father is going to kneel in front of you?" "I think," Richard replied, his voice cold and composed, "when a man runs a restaurant this badly, he should be grateful for any chance to correct his mistakes." Charles Benton, the corporate attorney and Richard's longtime legal advisor, shook his head with carefully performed disappointment. He picked up his napkin, dabbed lightly at the corner of his mouth, and looked around the dining room as though addressing an invisible jury. "So this is the five-star restaurant you were so proud to recommend, Richard?" Charles said. "The food is late, the staff argues with guests, and now a janitor and his daughter are standing here interrogating a billionaire." Greg Miller, a private investor and Richard's closest business friend, burst into a loud laugh. It was rough, forced, and cruel. The daughter shouts in a customer's face. The father stands there pretending he has authority. "And we're supposed to call this fine dining?" Greg shook his head. "I have to admit, this place is entertaining." Richard was the first to laugh. "Humph." Greg immediately joined in. "Ha ha." Then Charles released a smooth, cold, merciless laugh. "Ha ha ha." The three men laughed together at the table, surrounded by spilled wine and the silent eyes of everyone watching. Sarah Jenkins, the general manager of Carter House, hurried over from the reception desk. Her face was tense, but she tried to remain professional. "Mr. Whitmore," Sarah said, "we can resolve this respectfully." Richard's eyes snapped toward her. "Stay out of this unless you want your name included in the complaint." Sarah stopped. Annie pointed at the wine stain on the floor. "You insulted my father. You spilled wine on purpose like a spoiled man with no manners. Then you told us to kneel down and clean it up. And now your friends are laughing as if that makes you powerful." Richard slowly rose from his chair. "Listen carefully," he said. "I don't know who you think you are, but I know exactly who I am. I can buy this building before breakfast. I can have inspectors in your kitchen before noon. I can make 3 phone calls tonight and make sure no bank in Atlanta ever touches this place again." Greg pointed at Annie. "You should apologize while you still have a place in this restaurant," Charles added. "And your father should think very carefully before allowing an employee to embarrass a paying guest." Annie turned to Charles. "I am not just an employee." Richard scoffed. "No, you are worse than that. You are family, which means he taught you to behave this way." Malcolm stepped closer to Annie and gently placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Everyone, please," Malcolm said. His voice was still calm, but beneath that calm was something tightly held back. "Do not let this go any further. Mr. Whitmore, I will speak to the kitchen personally. Your table will be served immediately. I will also ask our chef to prepare some of our finest dishes for you and your guests, completely free of charge. Short ribs, shrimp and grits, wine from the private cellar, anything you like. Let us make this right." Annie turned sharply to look at him, stunned. "Dad." Malcolm did not take his eyes off Richard. "Annie, let me handle this." Richard smiled as if he had just won. "There," he said. "That is the first intelligent thing I've heard from this place all evening." Greg chuckled. "Finally, someone remembers who the customer is." Charles raised his glass. "A little late, but at least it is progress." Richard looked down at the spilled wine, then back at Malcolm. "All right, you want to make it right, don't you?" He lightly dragged the toe of his shoe through the edge of the wine stain. "Start there." Malcolm's jaw moved once. Annie saw it. She stepped away from her father's hand and moved forward to face Richard. "No," she said. Richard narrowed his eyes. "No? No. You are not getting a free meal. You are not getting another bottle of wine. You do not get to threaten my father, insult the staff, pour wine on the floor, and call it service." Richard leaned closer to her. "Girl, one more word and you will learn what money can do." Annie did not step back. "And one more insult from you, and you will learn what my father has been too kind to show you." Richard did not recognize the warning. He was too angry to understand that the room was changing, too arrogant to notice that the eyes around him no longer looked at Malcolm like a servant. He pulled out his phone and held it up in front of Annie. "You think I'm joking?" he snarled. "In 10 minutes, I'll have people here. I'll have this place inspected, shut down, cleaned out, and destroyed before midnight." Malcolm's hand slowly dropped to his side. Sarah whispered, "Mr. Carter?" Malcolm's expression changed. Richard tapped the screen of his phone, still glaring at Annie. "Last chance," he said. "Both of you, get on your knees, clean this up, apologize to me, and maybe I will allow this restaurant to survive the night." Malcolm Carter looked at the spilled wine on the floor. Then he looked at Annie. Finally, he looked straight at Richard Whitmore. When Malcolm spoke, his voice was so quiet that everyone in the room had to lean forward to hear him. "Annie," he said, "stand behind me." At first, Annie did not move. Her father had told her to stand behind him, but every part of her wanted to resist. How could she step back when Richard Whitmore was still standing there near the red wine spreading across the floor, phone in hand, his face twisted with anger and contempt? "Annie," Malcolm said again. She turned her head slightly toward him. "Dad, don't make me stand behind you while he talks to you like that. I'm not asking you to do it because I'm ashamed." "Then why?" "Because I know what happens when men like him run out of words." Richard threw his head back slightly, his expression turning instantly offended. "Men like me?" Malcolm did not answer. That silence only made Richard even angrier. He suddenly slammed both palms down on the table and sprang to his feet. The chair behind him scraped across the floor with a sharp sound that made several guests flinch. "No, no, no," Richard growled. "I am not going to stand here and be lectured by kitchen help and their mouthy daughter." His voice rang through the dining room. "Do any of you know who I am? Does anyone in this room have any idea what I can do?" Sarah stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, please lower your voice." Richard turned sharply toward her. "Don't you dare try to control me." Sarah stopped, but she did not lower her head. Richard pointed around the room, his face flushed with anger. "I will bury this place. Do you hear me? I will have inspectors here before tomorrow morning. The health department, the fire marshal, the liquor licensing board, the tax office. I will have every permit on that wall examined before lunch. I will turn this restaurant into a warning for anyone who dares to forget their place." Greg half rose from his chair, growing more excited as Richard's rage built. "That's right," he chimed in. "People seem to have forgotten who they're dealing with." But Charles did not stand. He remained seated, his eyes fixed on Malcolm. Richard grabbed his phone and began stabbing at the screen. "You think I'm joking? I'll call the city. I'll call the press. I'll call the investors. I'll make sure no one with a respectable bank account ever dares to come here for dinner again." Annie stepped forward before Malcolm could stop her. "All of this because your dinner was late?" Richard let out a sharp, ugly laugh. "No, because your father forgot his place. If that moment made you feel Annie's pain and her father's quiet strength, please like this video, leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. And if you believe dignity should never be bought or bullied, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. The words landed like a slap. Malcolm's hand, which had been resting on Annie's shoulder, slowly loosened. Annie noticed. Richard continued, taking advantage of the silence he had created. You want to act proud? Fine. I'll show you what pride costs. In 10 minutes, my people will be here. They'll clear this room, smash every bottle behind that bar, overturn every table, and when I'm finished, the only thing left of Carter House will be a stain on the sidewalk. Sarah's face tightened. That is a threat, Mr. Whitmore. No, Richard replied. It is a promise. At last, Charles spoke. Richard, stop talking. Richard turned toward him. You work for me, Charles, don't forget that. I advise you, Charles said quietly. And right now, my advice is for you to shut your mouth. Greg blinked. What is wrong with you? Charles did not look at Greg. His eyes remained fixed on Malcolm. I am trying to stop a bad night from becoming a very expensive one. Richard scoffed. Maybe expensive for them. No, Charles said. For you. That was the first moment Richard hesitated. Malcolm turned to Sarah. Lock the front door. Not to keep anyone in, but to keep trouble from coming in from outside. Move our guests to the east dining room. Coffee, tea, dessert, whatever they want. No charge tonight. Sarah nodded immediately. Yes, Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter. Richard caught the name. His eyes narrowed. Wait, Carter? Annie looked at Sarah, then back at her father. Malcolm's expression did not change. Richard pointed at him. You own this place? Malcolm answered calmly. Yes. Greg sneered. So what? He owns a restaurant. Richard owns half the city skyline. No, Malcolm said. He rents trust from banks. Greg's mouth opened, then closed again. Richard took a step forward. Careful. Malcolm looked directly into his eyes. You have had many chances to be careful tonight. Richard pressed the phone to his ear. I've had enough. A voice answered on the other end. Richard turned slightly away, but his eyes stayed locked on Malcolm and Annie. Get to Carter House now, he said. Bring everyone. I want this place cleared out and destroyed. If the front door is locked, break it down. Sarah drew in a deep breath. Annie's stomach tightened, but she did not step back. Richard smiled at her while still speaking into the phone. No, not later. Right now. I don't care who is inside. I want them scared enough to remember my name. Malcolm's face hardened only slightly, but Annie saw it. Richard ended the call and spread his arms. There, now we wait. Malcolm took out his own phone. He did not scroll through his contacts. He did not hesitate. He simply opened an existing conversation and typed 3 words. Annie saw them before he pressed send. Come inside now. He sent the message, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. Richard laughed. Calling your chef? No. The police? No. Then who? Malcolm looked at the spilled wine on the floor, then at Richard's polished shoes. People who understand the difference between empty words and consequences. Charles Benton went pale. Greg noticed and frowned. Charles? Charles whispered. We should not be here. Richard snapped. Stop saying that. I mean it. I said stop. Malcolm turned slightly toward Annie. Now stand behind me. This time she did, not because she was afraid of Richard Whitmore, but because she finally understood that her father had not been avoiding this fight. He had simply been holding it back for too long. Outside the restaurant, car doors began closing one after another. Richard smiled, trying to pull his confidence back into place. Good, my people are here. Charles slowly rose to his feet. For your sake, I hope they are not. The side door near the bar opened first. A man in a black suit walked in, then a second man followed. From the service hallway, 2 more appeared. They moved without rushing, without noise. They simply observed the room, as if they already knew every exit, every blind spot, and every working camera. Then an older man with silver hair entered. He buttoned his coat as he walked, calm and composed, as if he had only come for a private meeting. Sarah bowed her head. Charles Benton shot to his feet so quickly that his chair struck the table behind him. The silver-haired man stopped beside Malcolm. He glanced once at Richard, then bowed his head to Annie's father. Sir, he said. The word did not arrive loudly. It arrived clean. Boss. 1 syllable, spoken by an older man in a dark suit, and it changed everything Richard Whitmore thought he understood about the room. Annie stood behind Malcolm, close enough to see the back of his hand. It did not shake. It did not flex. Her father did not turn around, did not acknowledge the word with pride or surprise. He accepted it the way a man accepts his own name. The silver-haired man beside him stood straight, hands at his sides. His face was lined, his eyes steady. He looked like someone who had spent a lifetime entering rooms after decisions had already been made. Richard stared at him. "Who the hell are you?" The man did not answer Richard. He looked at Malcolm. "Front is clear," he said. 3 vehicles outside. 4 men in the first 2, driver in the third. They saw me and stopped moving. Richard's mouth tightened. "Those are my men." The silver-haired man glanced at him. "Not anymore, if they're smart." Greg Miller gave a nervous laugh. "Is that supposed to scare us?" "No," the man said. "It's supposed to save you from calling them twice." Charles Benton had not sat back down. His face was pale now, the confident polish gone from it. He looked from Malcolm to the silver-haired man and swallowed. Malcolm finally spoke. "Leon." The silver-haired man turned slightly. "Yes, sir. Keep everyone calm. No one touches anyone. No one raises a hand in my house." Leon Briggs nodded once. "Understood." Annie heard the name, Leon. She had seen it once before, years ago, written on a Christmas card that arrived without a return address. Malcolm had opened it, read 2 lines, then placed it in the top drawer of his desk. When Annie asked who Leon was, he said, "An old friend who knows when not to visit." She had thought it was one of his dry jokes. Now Leon stood in the middle of the Carter house, and men in suits had entered through side doors without needing directions. Richard lifted his chin. "I don't care what kind of private security act this is. I made a phone call. My people are outside." Leon reached into his jacket. Annie stiffened, but Malcolm's hand shifted slightly behind him, palm down. "Wait." Leon removed only a phone. He tapped once, put it on speaker, and held it out. A man's voice came through, low and strained. "Mr. Whitmore?" Richard frowned. "Tate, get inside." There was a pause. "We're leaving." Richard's face went red. "You're what?" "We're leaving, sir. I paid you to do a job." Another pause. This one longer. "No amount you pay covers walking into Malcolm Carter's place." The room stayed silent. Richard gripped his phone so hard his knuckles whitened. "You work for me." "Not tonight." The call ended. Greg stared at Richard. Charles closed his eyes for a moment. Sarah Jenkins, still near the host stand, lowered her gaze. Not out of fear, but because she understood she was watching a man lose more than an argument. Richard turned slowly toward Malcolm. "Malcolm Carter," he said, like he was testing the name and hating the taste of it. "So you have some old street friends. That's your big secret?" Malcolm's voice remained even. "My secret is that I spent years making sure men like you never had to meet them." Richard gave a harsh laugh. "You think I'm afraid of ghosts?" Charles spoke before anyone else could. "Richard, listen to me." "No, listen to me." Charles lowered his voice, but it carried. "This is not a local tough guy. This is Malcolm Elijah Carter." The full name hit the table harder than the spilled wine. Greg looked at Charles. "Why does everybody keep acting like that means something?" Charles did not answer him right away. He was still watching Malcolm, as if measuring how much truth the room could survive. Then he said, "Because 20 years ago, nobody moved serious money through Atlanta without knowing whether Mr. Carter would allow it, block it, or own part of it before breakfast." Richard scoffed, but the sound lacked force. Charles continued, "Transport, nightclubs, restaurants, construction crews, private lending, security companies, neighborhood development funds, some legal, some not, most impossible to prove. People called him the quiet king of Auburn Avenue because he didn't need to appear on paper to control the paper." Annie felt the words enter her one by one. Transport, lending, security, control. Her father stood in front of her in a black apron. Her father, who taught her to say "yes, ma'am" to older women and never let a guest's glass sit empty. Her father, who cut peaches by hand for cobbler because canned filling was a shortcut the soul can taste. Her father, who made her start as an apprentice because a name is not a qualification. The quiet king of Auburn Avenue. She looked at Malcolm's shoulder, at the seam of his white shirt beneath the apron strap, and felt the room tilt. Richard noticed her face and smiled, quick and cruel. "Well, looks like your daughter didn't know either." Malcolm's jaw tightened. Annie stepped from behind him just enough to see his profile. "Daddy?" He did not look at her at first. That hurt more than an answer would have. Leon shifted slightly, but Malcolm raised one finger. Leon stopped. Malcolm turned to Annie then. The room waited. "Yes," he said. One word. No excuse. Annie's throat tightened. "Yes, what?" "Yes, there are parts of my life I did not tell you." Richard laughed under his breath. "That's one way to say it." Malcolm looked at him. The laugh died. Then Malcolm turned back to Annie. "I wanted you to know the man I chose to become. Not every man I had to be before that." Annie searched his face. "Were you dangerous?" A quiet passed over Malcolm. Not shame exactly. Not denial either. "Yes." The honesty struck harder than any defense. Greg muttered, "This is insane." Charles said, "Be quiet." Richard shook his head, trying to rebuild himself out of contempt. "So that's it? The noble restaurant owner was a criminal, and everybody's supposed to be impressed?" Malcolm faced him fully. "No one asked you to be impressed. You think this helps you? I can call federal people. I can call reporters. I can have your past dragged through every screen in the country." "You could." Richard pointed at him. "I will." Malcolm nodded. "Then they'll ask why you called men to break into a full restaurant. They'll ask why you threatened staff. They'll ask why 3 witnesses heard you order a black business owner and his daughter to kneel in spilled wine. They'll ask what kind of man does that after signing a deal to tear apart a historic neighborhood he never cared to understand." Richard's face changed. Only a little, but everyone saw it. The deal. Malcolm knew about the deal. Charles stepped back from the table. Malcolm continued. "They may ask about Halden Group too, about the bridge loan, about the shares you pledged twice because you assumed no one would notice before closing." Greg turned to Richard. "What is he talking about?" Richard snapped, "Nothing." Malcolm looked at Greg. "Ask your friend why he needed tonight's celebration so badly." Greg's anger gave way to calculation. Richard lunged verbally, not physically. "You don't know a damn thing about my business." Malcolm reached into his apron pocket and took out a folded white cloth. He handed it to Sarah without looking away from Richard. "Sarah, have someone clean the wine before someone slips." Sarah took it. "Yes, Mr. Carter." Richard stared at him. "That's it? You're just going to stand there and pretend you have leverage?" Malcolm looked tired now, not weak, tired of being invited back into a life he had buried. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "you still have one way to leave this restaurant with something intact." Richard's lips curled. "And what's that?" "Apologize to my daughter. Apologize to my staff. Apologize to the people whose evening you tried to ruin. Then, walk out." Richard stared at him, then burst out laughing. "Ha! Ha ha ha! You think I'm going to apologize to you?" Leon glanced at Malcolm. The men near the side doors remained still. Malcolm's voice softened, which somehow made it more dangerous. "No," he said. "I think you're going to wish you had." Richard lifted his phone again. "You know what? I'm done with threats. I'm making calls." Malcolm turned slightly toward Leon. Not a command. Not yet. Just a look. Leon waited. Annie saw it then. The thing her father had been holding back was not violence. It was access. A network. A past. A reach that did not need to shout because it had been built before she was born. Richard tapped his screen, furious. Malcolm raised one hand, barely above his waist. A small, tired motion. A warning. "Richard," Charles said quietly. "Put the phone down." Richard ignored him. Malcolm's fingers moved once. Leon stepped away to make a call of his own. Leon did not raise his voice when he stepped toward the bar. That was what made it frightening. He moved past the empty tables, past the overturned wine glass, past the frozen staff, and stood near the brass lamp at the end of the counter. He made one call. No speech. No explanation. Just a few quiet sentences spoken with the confidence of a man who knew the person on the other end had already been waiting. "Yes," Leon said. "Now, Halden, Crescent Bank, and the insurance file. All 3. Send the first notice through the proper channel. No noise, no leaks, we cannot prove." Richard watched him, still holding his own phone, but he had stopped dialing. "What is that supposed to be?" Richard asked. "A performance?" Malcolm did not answer. Charles Benton, corporate attorney, looked as if he wanted to sit down but no longer trusted his legs. Greg Miller, private investor, kept glancing from Richard to Charles, waiting for somebody richer or smarter than him to explain why a restaurant owner in an apron could make a lawyer look like a man hearing a verdict. Richard turned on Charles. "Say something." Charles swallowed. "Richard, I need to ask you a question. This is not the time." "It is exactly the time." Charles lowered his voice. "Did you pledge the same block of Whitmore Holdings shares to Crescent and to Northgate?" Greg's head snapped toward Richard. "What?" Richard's face hardened. "Careful, Charles." Charles did not blink. "Did you?" "I handled financing." "That isn't an answer." Richard stepped closer to him. "You are my attorney, and I am telling you, as your attorney, that if Mr. Carter has documents showing double-pledged collateral, you need to stop speaking." Annie heard the words, but only part of their meaning reached her. Double-pledged collateral, financing, shares. Those were not kitchen words. They were not restaurant words. They belonged to a world her father had kept locked away. She looked at Malcolm. He was watching Richard, not with pleasure, but with the weary focus of a man cleaning up a mess he had hoped never to touch. Richard forced a laugh. "This is ridiculous. You're all letting a ghost story scare you." Leon returned from the bar and stood beside Malcolm. "First notice is out." Richard lifted his chin. "To who?" Leon looked at Malcolm first. Malcolm gave the smallest nod. "To Crescent Bank's risk desk," Leon said. "To Halden Group's closing counsel, and to 2 board members at Whitmore Holdings who don't like finding out about debt exposure from the morning news." Greg pushed away from the table. "Richard, what debt exposure?" "Sit down," Richard snapped. "No, I have money in that company. You have money because I let you make money." Greg's face flushed. "And if you lied about the collateral?" Richard pointed at him. "Don't start acting righteous because you got scared." A phone buzzed, then another. Charles looked down first. His screen lit his face. Greg's phone followed, then Richard's. For a moment, nobody moved. Richard snatched up his phone and read the notification. His eyes moved once, then again. The color began to leave his face. Greg read aloud, voice thin. "Whitmore Holdings faces emergency lender review after collateral concerns are raised in pending Halden transaction." He looked up. "Richard." Charles closed his eyes. "Damn it." Richard stabbed at his screen, calling someone. "Pick up, pick up." He waited 2 rings, then cursed. "Diane, call me back right now. Not in 5 minutes. Now." Leon stood quietly. Annie looked from phone to phone. "Daddy, what did you do?" Malcolm did not take his eyes off Richard. "I told the truth to people who were already owed it." Richard spun toward him. "You leaked confidential information." "No," Malcolm said. "I sent verified concerns through legal channels to parties with financial exposure." Charles exhaled, almost in pain. "That's worse." Greg stared at him. "Worse for who?" "For Richard." Richard slammed his phone onto the table. "You think you can hurt me with paperwork?" Malcolm looked at the wine on the floor. Sarah had sent a busser to clean it, but the young man stood frozen with the towel in his hand, unsure whether to step into the center of the storm. Malcolm noticed. "Go ahead, Marcus," he said gently. "No one is kneeling tonight." Marcus, junior server, nodded and wiped the floor standing upright, using a mop from the side station. That small correction meant something. People in the room felt it. Annie felt it most. Richard had ordered them to kneel. Malcolm had answered by making sure no one did. Richard's phone buzzed again. He grabbed it. "What?" he barked. "No, do not suspend anything. Do you hear me? The Halden deal closes Monday." He listened, face tightening. "Because if it doesn't close, we have a liquidity problem. That's why." Greg whispered. "Liquidity problem?" Charles muttered. And now he said it out loud. Richard looked around and realized several phones were still recording. "Turn those off," he shouted. "All of you, turn them off." An older woman by the east doorway, Mrs. Evelyn Price, retired school principal and longtime guest of the Carter house, held her phone at chest height and said, "No, sir." Richard stared at her. "Excuse me?" She was small, silver-haired, wearing a navy church dress and pearls. Her husband had passed 3 years earlier, and Malcolm still kept their anniversary table open every October because she liked to sit there with coffee and peach cobbler. Mrs. Price lifted her chin. "I said no. You were loud enough when you insulted that man. Don't get shy now that consequences arrived." A few quiet murmurs of agreement followed. Richard looked at Malcolm. "You're enjoying this?" "No," Malcolm said. "I tried to prevent this. You humiliated me. You arrived with that already in you." I only stopped helping you hide it." Richard's eyes sharpened with rage. "You think because some old street name still scares people, you're better than me?" Malcolm's voice lowered. "No, I think I have been worse than you in ways I pray my daughter never has to understand. That is why I gave you every chance to leave with dignity." Annie turned toward him. The admission cut through her anger. Malcolm did not say it like a confession meant to earn pity. He said it like a fact he had carried for years. Richard stepped closer, almost trembling now. "I'll go to the FBI." "Then go," Malcolm said. "Tell them everything. Tell them about me. Tell them about the men outside. Tell them about the wine, the threat, the call you made to have this restaurant broken apart. Tell them about the land deal your own partners are about to review. Tell them about the families in that neighborhood you plan to push out before Christmas." Greg looked at Richard. "Before Christmas?" Richard did not answer. Annie heard that part clearly. The historic neighborhood. The homes. The people whose churches, barbershops, porches, and Sunday dinners Richard had called sentiment. She stepped out beside Malcolm. "That deal you celebrated tonight. That's the neighborhood near Auburn Avenue, isn't it?" Richard's silence answered. Annie's voice changed. "You came into a black-owned restaurant, celebrated tearing apart a black neighborhood, insulted my father, spilled wine on the floor, and told us to kneel." Charles murmured, "Richard, for God's sake, apologize." Richard looked at Annie with pure contempt. "I don't apologize because a waitress learned a few big words." Malcolm moved before Annie could respond. Only one step. Leon did not move. The men near the doors did not move. But Richard stepped back anyway. That one step told the room everything. Malcolm looked at him, and the calm in his voice was gone now, replaced by something colder. "You will apologize to my daughter." Richard laughed, but it broke halfway. "Or what?" Another phone buzzed. Greg's. He looked down, then covered his mouth. Charles checked his own. "Trading desk is asking whether Whitmore Holdings will issue a statement before pre-market." Richard snatched his phone again. More notifications, messages stacking, missed calls, a headline updating, numbers moving after hours, red and merciless. Leon said quietly, "Second notice cleared." Richard stared at Malcolm. "Stop it." Malcolm said nothing. "I said stop it." Malcolm looked at the table, at the spilled wine, at the empty chairs, at the staff he had spent years protecting from men who thought a tip bought their dignity. Then he looked back at Richard. "You threatened to destroy my house," Malcolm said. "I reminded yours what it was built on." For the first time all night, Richard Whitmore had no answer. His phone rang. He looked at the name on the screen and went still. Charles saw it. "Is that Halden?" Richard did not speak. Greg stepped away from him as if distance might save his investment. The phone kept ringing. Malcolm turned to Sarah. "Make sure our guests have dessert. Tell the kitchen the peach cobbler goes out warm." Sarah nodded. "Yes, Mr. Carter." Annie looked at her father. "How can you think about dessert right now?" Malcolm's eyes stayed on Richard. "Because a man like him does not get to decide how this house ends its evening." Richard finally answered the call, his voice smaller than it had been 10 minutes ago. "Yes," he said. "No, this is being handled." He listened. His face collapsed by inches. "No," he said. "Do not pull the closing. Listen to me. Do not pull." The line went dead. The room heard the silence after. Richard lowered the phone slowly. Leon leaned toward Malcolm. Halden paused the transaction. Charles sat down as if his knees had given up. Greg whispered a curse. Annie did not understand every financial detail, but she understood Richard's face. It was the face of a man who had ordered others to kneel and just felt the floor vanish beneath him. Malcolm adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. "Now," he said, quiet but clear, "we can talk about your apology." Richard looked at Malcolm as if the word apology belonged to another language. The phone in his hand had gone dark, but he kept staring at it, waiting for the screen to save him. 10 minutes earlier, he had been the loudest man in the Carter house. He had laughed with his friends, thrown wine on the floor, threatened licenses, banks, inspectors, and violence. Now the room watched him stand beside his own table with the first real cost of the night sitting in his throat. Malcolm Carter did not move closer. He did not need to. "Apologize," Malcolm said. Richard swallowed. "You don't get to order me around." Annie stepped beside her father, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Nobody ordered you when you told us to kneel." You seemed comfortable giving instructions then. Greg Miller shifted away from Richard's side of the table. Charles Benton sat with one hand over his mouth, eyes fixed on the white tablecloth, as if he could already see tomorrow's legal work spreading across it. Richard glared at Annie. This is between grown men. No, Annie said. You made it about me when you called me low class. You made it about the staff when you threatened their jobs. You made it about everyone in here when you tried to turn a restaurant into a stage for your ego. Sarah Jenkins stood near the host stand with her hands folded. The main dining room had not fully emptied after all. Several guests remained near the east doorway, close enough to hear, far enough to be safe. Mrs. Evelyn Price still held her phone. The older veteran by the window stood with his hat in both hands. Marcus, the junior server, had finished cleaning the wine but stayed near the service station, mop upright like a flagpole. Richard saw the phones. His face tightened. Turn those off. Mrs. Price answered before anyone else could. Not until you say what needs saying. Richard laughed once, but it came out thin. You people really think a video changes anything? Charles finally lifted his head. Richard, stop. Richard turned on him. You're fired. Charles nodded slowly. Probably. But until that becomes official, take the advice you paid for. Apologize cleanly. No excuses. No clever phrasing. No if anyone was offended. Say what you did. Greg looked at Charles. You're really siding with them? Charles stared at him. I'm siding with the part of my career that doesn't want to be questioned under oath. Malcolm's eyes never left Richard. My daughter asked you a question when this began. You still haven't answered it. Richard's jaw worked. Annie spoke the words again, quieter this time. Did you insult my father? The room held still. Richard looked at Malcolm, then Annie, then the guests. Pride fought with fear on his face. Pride still had teeth, but fear had its hand on the money. I spoke harshly, he said. Annie shook her head. Try again. I was dissatisfied with the service. No. Richard's nostrils flared. I said things I shouldn't have said. Malcolm said, to whom? Richard's eyes flashed. To you. And? Richard's gaze moved to Annie. To her. Sarah spoke from across the room. And to the staff. The veteran added, and to the room. Mrs. Price said, and to every person you thought was beneath you. Richard's face burned. This is ridiculous. Malcolm's voice stayed even. No, this is the smallest consequence you will face tonight. That landed. Richard looked down at his phone again. A new message appeared. He read it, and his lips parted slightly. Charles noticed. Bored? Charles asked. Richard did not answer. Malcolm waited. Annie realized that was one of her father's strongest weapons. He knew how to wait. He did not fill silence with fear. He let other people hear themselves inside it. Richard finally lifted his head. I apologize, he said. Mrs. Price lowered her phone slightly. We can barely hear you. Richard looked at her with hatred, then raised his voice. I apologize to Mr. Carter. Annie said. For what? Richard stared at her. She stared back. For insulting him, he said. And? For speaking disrespectfully. And? Richard's grip tightened on the back of his chair. For spilling the wine. You did not spill it, Annie said. You poured it. A murmur went through the room. Richard closed his eyes. For pouring the wine, and telling us to kneel. His eyes opened. Malcolm turned slightly toward Annie, not stopping her, only watching. Richard's voice dropped. For telling you to kneel. Annie did not let him look away. Say why you thought you could. Charles muttered. Jesus, Annie. She did not move. Say it. Richard's face hardened again. I don't know what you want from me. Yes, you do, she said. You walked in here and saw a black man in an apron. You decided he was less than you before he even opened his mouth. Then you saw me in uniform and decided the same thing about me. That is what happened. Say it. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of years. Years of swallowed comments, polite smiles, lowered heads, older men teaching younger ones which rooms were safe and which ones were only pretending. Richard looked around. And for once the room did not help him. No friendly laughter. No waiter rushing to rescue his comfort. No attorney smoothing the edge. No investor clapping him on the back. Only people waiting. Richard spoke through his teeth. I judged you by your race and by the work I thought you did. Annie held his gaze. And I was wrong. The words came out like they cost him money. Malcolm nodded once. That is enough. No, Annie said. Malcolm looked at her. She turned to him, her voice softer but firm. Daddy. Not yet. Richard let out a bitter laugh. What now? Annie looked at the staff. Marcus. Elise. Sarah. The dishwasher. Luis. Still half hidden by the service hallway. People who had carried plates, wiped counters, smiled through insults, and gone home with sore feet because rent did not care how customers behaved. You apologize to them, Annie said. Not as background people. By name if you know them. And if you don't know their names, that's part of the problem. Richard looked trapped. Sarah stepped forward. My name is Sarah Jenkins. He looked at her. I apologize, Miss Jenkins. For? Annie asked. Richard exhaled hard. For threatening your staff and your restaurant. Sarah nodded once, professional to the end. Accepted. Marcus raised his hand a little, awkward and brave. Marcus Reed. Richard looked as if the humiliation might choke him. I apologize, Mr. Reed. Marcus said. Thank you. Elise spoke next. Elise Walker. Then Luis. Luis Ramirez. Richard repeated each name. By the third one, his voice had lost its edge. Not because he had become better, but because the room had made cruelty inefficient. When he finished, Malcolm turned to Sarah. Please see that Mr. Whitmore's table receives their check. Richard jerked his head up. Check? You offered the meal on the house. That offer expired when you threatened my people. Greg whispered. Unbelievable. Malcolm looked at him. Would you like a separate apology or a separate bill? Greg shut his mouth. Charles almost smiled, then stopped himself. Sarah returned with the leather check presenter and placed it on the table. Richard did not touch it. Malcolm said, You will pay your bill, leave a proper gratuity for the staff you abused, and walk out without another word to anyone in this room. Richard leaned close enough that only Malcolm and Annie could hear clearly. You think tonight is over? Malcolm's face did not change. No. I think tonight is the part you will wish was over. Richard stared at him. Then he signed the check with a hard slash of the pen, added a tip large enough to insult no one, and pushed the presenter away. He grabbed his coat. Greg followed quickly. Charles remained a moment longer. The attorney looked at Malcolm. For what it's worth, I told him to stop. Malcolm said, You told him late. Charles accepted that with a small nod and left. Richard walked toward the exit, but near the door he turned back, unable to resist one last attempt at dignity. This city forgets fast, he said. Mrs. Price answered from the east doorway. Not people like us. Richard's face tightened. He stepped outside. Through the front glass, Annie saw the men who had come for him standing near their SUVs, not looking at him. Leon's people remained where they were, still as shadows. The door closed behind Richard Whitmore. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the old veteran near the window began clapping. Once. Twice. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. Mrs. Price joined him. Marcus did. Sarah did. Soon the sound filled the dining room, not wild, not celebratory, but steady. It was not applause for Malcolm's power. It was applause for the moment a man who thought he could make others kneel had been forced to stand in his own shame. Annie turned toward her father. Malcolm looked older than he had an hour ago. Daddy, she said. He gave her a small, tired smile. You should not have had to do that. She swallowed. Neither should you. He looked at the floor where the wine had been. No, he said. But we did. Leon approached quietly. Boss, Halden's people want a response before morning. Malcolm closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them. Not here, he said. Tonight this is still a restaurant. He turned to Sarah. How many guests are still waiting on dessert? Sarah looked around, gathering herself. 14. Malcolm nodded. Then peach cobbler goes out warm, coffee fresh. No one leaves this house with Richard Whitmore as the last taste in their mouth. Annie stared at him, caught between anger, pride, and a question she was afraid to ask. Her father straightened his apron and walked toward the kitchen. The room slowly began breathing again, but Annie knew something had changed that would not be cleaned up with wine, applause, or warm dessert. The man she had defended tonight was her father. He was also someone else. And before the night ended, she would need to know how much of that someone else had been standing beside her all along. Malcolm disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors. And for a moment, Annie stayed where she was, standing in the dining room while applause faded into the low scrape of chairs, the clink of spoons, and the careful voices of people trying to return to an evening that had been split in two. Sarah Jenkins moved first. She always did. Marcus, fresh coffee on table 6. Elise, check on Mrs. Price. Louise, tell the kitchen we need 14 cobblers warmed, not rushed. Nobody carries a plate out looking shaken. We are still the Carter house. The staff obeyed because Sarah sounded like herself again. That helped. The room needed ordinary things. Coffee, dessert, napkins, receipts, anything that reminded people they had not just watched a billionaire order a black man and his daughter to kneel in spilled wine. Annie picked up the towel she had thrown onto Richard's table. It was damp at one corner, stained red where it had touched the tablecloth. She folded it twice without thinking. Leon Briggs stood near the bar, speaking quietly to one of his men. When he saw Annie looking at him, he stopped mid-sentence. He did not smile. Not exactly. He gave her a nod that felt older than politeness. Miss Carter, he said. The way he said her name made her uncomfortable. Respectful, yes, but heavy, as if the name carried a history she had not agreed to inherit. Do I know you? She asked. Leon's eyes softened by a degree. You were little the last time I saw you. I don't remember. You weren't supposed to. That answer sat badly in her chest. Sarah came over and touched Annie's elbow. You okay? No. Sarah nodded. Good. I'd be worried if you said yes. Annie glanced toward the kitchen doors. How much did you know? Sarah did not pretend not to understand. She took a breath, looked toward the guests, then back at Annie. I knew your father owned the restaurant. I knew people respected him beyond normal business respect. I knew certain vendors never argued with our invoices, and certain city inspectors became very polite after making one phone call. She paused. I did not know everything. Did everybody know except me? No, Sarah said firmly. And don't do that to yourself. Your father built a wall around that part of his life because he wanted you safe. Not foolish. Annie let out a humorless laugh. Safe from what? The truth? Sarah's face changed. She was not old enough to be Annie's grandmother, but she had the tired eyes of a woman who had raised younger siblings, buried friends too early, and worked enough double shifts to know truth had timing. Sometimes truth is a knife, Sarah said. Your father may have been wrong to hide it, but I don't think he hid it to cut you. I think he hid it because he was afraid it would. Before Annie could answer, the kitchen doors swung open. Malcolm came out carrying 2 plates of peach cobbler himself. He had changed his shirt. The apron was still black, still tight at the waist, but the wine stain was gone. That made Annie's throat tighten. He had removed the evidence from his sleeve before she was ready to stop seeing it. He walked to Mrs. Price's table and set 1 plate in front of her. Warm enough? Mrs. Price looked up at him over her glasses. Malcolm Carter, don't you stand there asking about cobbler after what just happened like I'm one of your church ladies who can be distracted with butter and sugar. A small smile touched his mouth. Are you saying it won't work? I'm saying I'll eat it while I judge you. He nodded. That seems fair. She caught his hand before he turned away. You did right not letting that man make you ugly in front of your daughter. Malcolm looked down at her hand on his. For a second, his face opened. Not much. Enough. I came close, he said. But you didn't. He nodded once and moved on. Annie watched him deliver the 2nd plate to the veteran near the window, listened to him ask whether the coffee was fresh, watched him adjust a chair for an older woman before returning to the service station. Every movement was ordinary. That was what frightened her. Her father could stand in a room where men called him boss, where a billionaire's company began cracking by phone notification, and still ask whether coffee had burned on the warmer. Leon approached Malcolm near the bar. Halden's counsel wants a direct answer tonight. Malcolm's voice stayed low, but Annie moved close enough to hear. Tell them I will not speak from my dining room. They asked for assurance that the documents came from a credible source. Malcolm glanced at him. They know who the source is. They want you to say it. Then they can wait until morning. Leon accepted that. Crescent won't wait. Crescent waited when they took Whitmore's papers without asking the right questions. They can wait 1 night for my statement. Annie stepped in. Your statement? Both men turned. Malcolm's expression shifted, the father returning before the other man could speak. Annie. No, don't Annie me like I walked into a private office. This is my restaurant too, apparently, if family means anything. What statement? Leon looked at Malcolm, asking permission without asking aloud. Malcolm said, Mr. Whitmore's deal was weaker than he made it look. Some people who trusted him needed to be warned. You knew before tonight? Yes. How long? A few weeks. Annie stared. So when he walked in here, you already knew he was trying to tear up that neighborhood? I knew he was part of it. And you let him sit down? Malcolm's jaw tightened. A restaurant is not a courtroom. We serve people. We do not interrogate every guest at the door. He poured wine on the floor and told us to kneel. That changed the evening. No, Annie said. It showed you who he already was. Malcolm looked at her for a long moment. Yes. The honesty stopped her, but not enough. Why didn't you tell me any of this? The deal, Leon, the name. The fact that Charles looked like he saw a ghost when he heard your full name. A busser passed nearby, then quickly redirected himself when he felt the tension. Malcolm noticed, lowered his voice. Not here. Annie laughed once. You keep saying that. Not here. Not now. Not in front of people. When, Daddy? When do I get to know who I've been defending my whole life? His face changed at that. Pain, quick and controlled. You have never had to defend me your whole life. I did tonight. I know. No, I don't think you do. I saw him tell you to kneel. I saw you still try to offer him food. Do you know what that felt like? Malcolm looked toward the kitchen, then toward the room. Guests were eating again, but softly. Staff were moving, but listening despite themselves. The night was functioning. It was not healed. Come with me, he said. He led her down the service hallway, past the pantry shelves and stacked linen bags, past the office door, and into the small prep room where herbs hung drying near the back window. It smelled like thyme, lemon peel, and flour. When Annie was younger, she used to sit on the metal stool there and do homework while Malcolm checked inventory. He closed the door. For the first time that night, the noise of the restaurant became distant. Annie folded her arms. Tell me. Malcolm leaned against the prep table. He looked older in the fluorescent light. I was not a good man when I was young, he said. The directness made her quiet. I was not the worst man either. That is a comfort people use when they don't want to look too closely. I helped people. I hurt people. I protected businesses that banks ignored. I collected debts from men who thought contracts with black folks were optional. I also made money from fear, and once a man learns fear can pay, he has to fight not to become addicted to it. Annie swallowed. Were you a gangster? A faint, sad smile crossed his face. People who liked me said businessman. People who feared me said king. People who hated me said worse. The truth sits somewhere I don't enjoy visiting. Mom knew? Your mother knew me before I knew what to do with myself. What does that mean? It means she loved me, but she never excused me. There's a difference. Annie looked down at the towel still in her hand. She had carried it without realizing. Malcolm saw it. I did not kneel tonight because I was afraid of Richard Whitmore. Then why did you bend at all? Because every man has a door inside him. Behind mine is someone I promised your mother I would stop feeding. When Richard spilled that wine, I could feel that door opening. Annie's anger faltered. Malcolm's voice lowered. If you had not been there, I might have humiliated him sooner. Worse, cleaner, maybe, but colder. You think you saw weakness. What you saw was me trying to remain your father before I remembered how easy it used to be to become his enemy. Annie did not know what to say. From the dining room, someone laughed softly at something Mrs. Price must have said, life returning in pieces. Annie whispered, I don't want a perfect father. Malcolm looked at her. I want the true one. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, the wall was still there, but a crack had formed. Then after we close, he said, I'll tell you what I can. And what you can't, I'll tell you why. That was not enough, but it was more than she had ever had. A knock came at the door. Sarah's voice followed. Mr. Carter? Sorry. Richard Whitmore is still outside. He's refusing to leave the curb. Malcolm straightened. Annie looked at him. What now? Malcolm reached for the door, but before opening it, he said, "Now we make sure he understands the difference between being allowed to leave and being safe to stay." Sarah's words stayed in the prep room after she said them. "Richard Whitmore is still outside." Malcolm opened the door. "Where?" "At the curb," Sarah said, "near the first SUV. He's on the phone, shouting." Charles left in a rideshare. Greg is standing 10 feet away from him, pretending he doesn't know him. Annie almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat. Malcolm stepped into the hallway. "Are our guests settled?" "Yes, dessert is out." Mrs. Price asked if the coffee was strong enough to raise the dead. Marcus told her it was strong enough to raise a lawyer, and she said that would be a waste of good coffee. For the first time that night, Malcolm's mouth softened. "Good," he said. "Keep the mood light." Sarah looked past him to Annie. "You okay?" Annie answered honestly. "Not yet." Sarah nodded. "That's allowed." They walked back through the service hallway toward the dining room. The restaurant felt different now, as if everyone had lowered their voices out of respect for something they did not know how to name. Plates of warm peach cobbler sat on tables. Coffee steamed in white cups. A few guests tried to talk about ordinary things, but their eyes kept drifting toward Malcolm. Leon Briggs waited near the bar with 2 men beside him. He did not look impatient. Men like Leon did not need impatience. They seemed to have replaced it with memory. "Boss," he said quietly, "Whitmore is calling media contacts. He's telling someone he was threatened by armed men." Malcolm looked toward the front windows. Outside, Richard paced near the curb, one hand pressed to his ear, the other cutting through the air. His expensive coat hung open. His confidence was no longer smooth. It came in jerks. "Were any weapons shown?" Malcolm asked. "No." "Did anyone touch him?" "No." "Good." Leon's expression did not change. "He may not need facts to make noise." "He never did." Annie stopped beside her father. "So what do we do?" Malcolm looked at her. "We don't chase noise with noise." That sounds like something people say right before a liar gets the first headline. Leon glanced at her, and Annie could not tell whether he approved or found her reckless. Malcolm said, "Sometimes they do get the first headline. That doesn't mean they get the last word." Annie looked out the window. Richard was still talking, jaw tight, face red beneath the streetlights. "He'll lie." "Yes." "And you'll just let him?" "No," Malcolm said. "I'll let him lie on record." That answer made Leon's eyes sharpen. Sarah, standing near the host stand, leaned in. "Meaning?" "Meaning, if Mr. Whitmore wants to tell people he was threatened, we will preserve every camera angle in this building. Every phone recording our guests are willing to share. Every call log, every message, every witness statement." Malcolm turned to Leon. Quietly, Leon nodded. "Already started." Annie frowned. "You already started?" Leon looked at her. "Your father likes to give people chances. I prefer folders." That did make Annie laugh once, despite everything. It was small and exhausted, but real. Malcolm looked at Leon. "No intimidation. No visits. No reminders." Leon's face remained neutral. "You wound me. I know you." "Yes," Leon said. "That is why I heard the instruction the first time." Outside, Richard ended one call and immediately made another. Greg Miller took another step away from him, pretending to check his own phone. The men Richard had called earlier were gone. Their SUVs had pulled off without ceremony. Only one remained, and even that driver looked as if he wanted no part of what was happening. Malcolm moved toward the front door. Annie followed. He stopped. "Stay inside." "No." "Annie, I stood in that room when he told us to kneel. I can stand by a window." Malcolm studied her. The argument was there, ready in him, but he let it go. By the window, not outside. She accepted because she knew when she had won enough. Sarah unlocked the inner door but kept the outer one closed. The night air pressed cold against the glass. Richard saw Malcolm approach and turned with a smile that tried to be victorious. He raised his voice so it carried through the door. "There he is. The restaurant king." Malcolm opened the outer door halfway and stepped just outside, leaving one foot inside the threshold. Leon stood several feet behind him. Annie remained near the window, close enough to hear. Richard held his phone up. "I've got a reporter from Channel 8 calling me back. I hope your kitchen is clean." Malcolm said, "It is." Richard's smile twitched. "You think this is funny?" "No. You had men surround me. You called men to break into my restaurant. Mine arrived first and behaved better. Richard's mouth tightened. That's your version. It is also the camera's version. For the first time, Richard glanced up at the corners of the building. The small black security domes were barely visible beneath the awning. Malcolm continued. Inside cameras. Exterior cameras. Audio at the host stand. Guest recordings. Your call on speakerphone. Your apology. Your threat to have people break in if the door was locked. Richard's face shifted as each item landed. Greg, still near the curb, lowered his phone and looked at Richard with open alarm. Richard said, "You recorded me without consent?" Malcolm looked at him. "You shouted in my dining room in front of witnesses. Do not confuse privacy with arrogance." Annie felt those words settle into her. Do not confuse privacy with arrogance. That sounded like the kind of sentence her father had earned the hard way. Richard stepped closer. You think because you've got footage, I'm done? You think because Halden paused one deal, I'm finished? No, Malcolm said. I think you have choices. Richard laughed. You're offering me choices now? Yes. Go home. Call your lawyers. Tell the truth for once, at least to them. Tomorrow, issue a real apology to my staff and the people in that neighborhood you plan to displace. Withdraw from the Auburn redevelopment deal. Greg stared. Withdraw? Richard ignored him. And if I don't? Malcolm's voice stayed calm. Then every legal door you open tonight stays open. Financial review, civil complaints, witness statements, press inquiries, shareholder questions. Your board will decide whether you are a liability before breakfast Monday. Richard's eyes narrowed. You'd burn me down over a restaurant argument? Malcolm took one slow step closer. No. You burned yourself down because you thought the people serving you had no names. For a second, Richard had no answer. Then he leaned in and hissed. You're still what you were. Don't dress it up with family and peach cobbler. Annie's hand tightened around the window frame. Malcolm did not flinch. Maybe, but tonight I did not order anyone to kneel. Richard's face hardened. He looked past Malcolm and saw Annie behind the glass. Your daughter will learn what kind of man you really are, he said. Malcolm's expression changed. Not much. Enough. She will, he said. From me. Richard looked ready to spit out one more threat, but his phone rang. He checked the screen. His face went still again. Greg stepped closer. Who is it? Richard did not answer. He turned away and took the call, lowering his voice for the first time all evening. Malcolm watched him for a moment, then stepped back inside. Sarah locked the door behind him. Annie met him near the host stand. What now? Now he decides whether pride is worth more than survival. And if he decides wrong? Leon answered before Malcolm could. Then tomorrow will be a very long day for Mr. Whitmore. Malcolm looked at him. Leon gave a small shrug. That was not a threat. Merely scheduling. Sarah exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh. From the east dining room, Mrs. Price called, Malcolm, if you are done saving Atlanta, my coffee is getting cold. The tension cracked just enough for people to breathe. Malcolm turned toward the sound. Yes, ma'am. Annie watched him walk back into the restaurant, not to command men in suits, not to destroy a billionaire, but to refill an old woman's coffee himself. That was the part that confused her most. The dangerous man and the decent man were not standing in different places. They were both her father, and by the time the front door closed against the cold Atlanta night, Annie understood that the hardest truth would not be learning what Malcolm Carter had done. It would be learning how much of him had changed, and how much had only gone quiet. By the time the last guest left the Carter house, the clock over the bar had passed midnight. The restaurant looked almost normal again. Chairs were tucked in. Glasses had been cleared. The white tablecloth from Richard Whitmore's table was gone, carried to the laundry room with the red stain folded inward. Marcus wiped down the bar in slow circles. Elise checked the salt cellars. Luis came out from the back with a bus tub and asked Sarah if she needed anything else before he clocked out. Sarah said, Go home, Luis, and thank you. He looked toward Malcolm, who stood near the kitchen doors reading something on Leon's phone. Mr. Carter, Luis said, you need me tomorrow. I'll come early. Malcolm looked up. Your shift starts at 10. I know. Then come at 10. Luis nodded, but his eyes said he would come earlier anyway. That was the kind of loyalty Annie had seen all night. quiet and stubborn. The kind people could not be paid into giving. It had to be earned, and she was beginning to understand that her father had been earning things in rooms she never saw. After Luis left, Sarah locked the front door and turned the small brass sign from open to closed. Outside, the Atlanta street had thinned to headlights, wet pavement, and the occasional laugh from people leaving the bar down the block. Richard Whitmore was gone. His SUV had pulled away 20 minutes earlier after 2 more calls, one short and angry, one long and quiet. Greg Miller had left before him, without a handshake. Charles Benton never came back. Inside, Leon stood beside Malcolm with his phone in one hand and a folded file in the other. "Crescent wants a meeting at 8, Leon said. "No," Malcolm replied. Leon did not blink. "They said it has to be before market activity picks up. Then they should have asked better questions before they guaranteed Whitmore's paper." Leon's mouth twitched. "That is almost exactly what I told them, only with less grace." Sarah, counting receipts near the host stand, looked over her glasses. "Leon, do I want to know why a bank is calling a restaurant after midnight?" "No, ma'am," Leon said. "Good. I'm too tired to learn finance from a man who looks like he knows where bodies are buried." Leon considered that, figuratively these days. Sarah paused. Malcolm looked at him. Leon added, "Mostly." Annie should have laughed. On another night, she might have. But the word bodies landed too close to the question sitting in her chest. She stood by the service station, still in uniform, still holding the folded towel she should have dropped in laundry long ago. She had not clocked out. No one had told her to. Maybe no one knew how to send the boss's daughter home after watching her challenge a billionaire. Malcolm noticed her silence. "Sarah," he said, "thank you for tonight. Make sure everyone gets paid for the full shift and the extra hour." Sarah closed the ledger. "Already done. And add a bonus." "Already noted." He gave her a tired look. "You anticipated me? I've managed this floor for 7 years, Malcolm. You are not as mysterious as men like to think they are." Leon made a low sound that might have been approval. Sarah picked up her coat, then stopped beside Annie. "Go easy on him, but don't let him dodge." Annie looked at her. "That sounds like 2 different instructions." "It is. Good daughters learn balance." Sarah squeezed her arm and left through the side entrance. The door clicked shut behind her. Now only Annie, Malcolm, and Leon remained in the dining room. For the first time all night, Malcolm seemed to feel the silence. He looked at the tables, the bar, the framed photographs along the wall. Grandmothers in church hats, men in work shirts outside old grocery stores, women stirring pots in church basements, a black and white photo of Annie's mother standing in front of the restaurant before it officially opened, one hand on her hip, smiling like she already knew it would survive. Malcolm's eyes rested there longest. Leon saw it and lowered his voice. "I can handle the calls." Malcolm nodded. "Do that. Do you want me nearby?" "No." Leon looked at Annie, then back at Malcolm. "You sure?" Malcolm's answer came after a beat. "Yes." Leon accepted it. He walked toward the service corridor, then stopped beside Annie. "Miss Carter?" She looked at him. "Are you going to tell me to be patient too?" "No." He slipped one hand into his coat pocket. "Patience is useful when the truth is late, not when it has been kept waiting on purpose." Malcolm's face tightened slightly. Leon continued, "But remember this, your father was never careless with you, not once." Annie held his gaze. "That doesn't make him honest." "No," Leon said. "It makes the dishonesty more painful." Then he left. The room felt larger without him. Malcolm took off his apron slowly and folded it over the back of a chair. Annie watched the movement. She had seen him do it 1,000 times. But tonight it looked ceremonial, as if he were setting one life down before speaking from another. "Come sit," he said. She did not want to sit. Sitting felt too calm, but her feet hurt, and anger did not make them hurt less. She followed him to the table near the kitchen, the one staff used for family meal before service. Malcolm pulled out a chair for her. She sat. He sat across from her. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Annie broke first. "Was Leon part of it?" "Yes." "Part of what exactly?" Malcolm looked at his hands. Large hands. Cook's hands. Father's hands. Maybe other things too. "Protection," he said. "Collections. Transport. Private lending. Real estate pressure. Things that were legal on paper and ugly underneath. Things that were illegal, no matter how clean the paper looked." Annie breathed in slowly. Did you hurt people? He looked at her then. No dodge. No soft landing. Yes. Her eyes burned, but she refused to look away. How many? I don't know how to answer that in a way that won't either hide too much or make me sound proud of surviving. That sounds like an answer built by a lawyer. It's an answer built by shame. That stopped her. Malcolm leaned back. He looked older now than he had when Richard threatened him. I grew up 5 blocks from here. Different Atlanta then. Same Atlanta too, in the ways that matter. Banks smiled at men like Richard. They locked doors on men like my father. We had talent, labor, ideas, land. Churches full of people who could build, cook, drive, repair, organize, but the money did not come to us unless someone took a piece of our dignity with it. So you took money another way. At first I told myself I was helping our people get what the city owed them. Sometimes that was true. I kept businesses open. I protected families from men worse than me. I made sure widows weren't forced out of homes because a paper got signed wrong by someone who couldn't read the fine print. And the other times? His mouth tightened. The other times I liked being feared. There it was. Not the full truth maybe, but a true piece of it. Annie looked toward the photo of her mother. Mom knew that. She knew before I admitted it to myself. What did she say? Malcolm's eyes moved to the same photo. She said fear makes people obey, but it never makes them love you. And she told me if I kept building my life on fear, one day I would come home to a house where nobody was waiting for me. Annie's throat tightened. But she was waiting, for a while. His voice went quiet. Then she wasn't. The silence after that was not empty. It held the absence Annie had grown up beside. Her mother was in photographs, recipes. The perfume bottle Malcolm never moved from the dresser, the way he stopped speaking for a few seconds every year on her birthday. Annie had always thought grief made him quiet. Now she wondered how much guilt lived inside that quiet too. Did she make you leave that world? Annie asked. No, she asked. I promised. Then I failed. Then she asked again. Then you were born. And I looked at you and understood I could not raise my daughter in a house where men like Leon came through the back door at midnight with blood on their cuffs. Annie flinched. Malcolm noticed. Pain crossed his face. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for saying it now. Apologize for letting me grow up not knowing what the silence meant. He nodded slowly. You're right. She had expected him to defend himself. The fact that he didn't made her angrier for 1 second, then sadder. I built the Carter house because your mother loved feeding people, he said. Not serving them, feeding them. She said food was the only language where pride and tenderness could sit at the same table. I thought if I could build a place like that, maybe I could become the kind of man who deserved to stand in it. Annie looked down at the towel in her hands. And did you? I try every day. Outside, a siren passed several streets away and faded. Annie asked the question that had been waiting since Richard said the name like a threat. Are you still that man? Malcolm did not answer quickly. I know how to reach him, he said. That is not the same as being him, but it is closer than I wish. Annie's eyes filled despite her effort. When Richard told us to kneel, I wanted you to destroy him. I know. Then when you started doing it, I got scared. I know that too. She wiped her cheek fast, angry at the tear. I don't know what I want from you. Malcolm's voice softened. Truth is a hard thing to receive all at once. She looked at him. Then don't make me beg for it piece by piece. He nodded. I won't. Promise me. I promise. She believed him. Not because trust had fully returned, but because Malcolm Carter did not make promises lightly. That was something she still knew. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced down. A video notification. Someone had posted the moment she stood before Richard. The caption read, Apprentice calls out billionaire at the Carter house. Annie turned the phone face down. Malcolm saw it. By morning, people will have opinions about you. They already do. Strangers can be cruel. So can rich men in dining rooms. A faint smile touched his mouth, then vanished. You should not have had to defend me. You said that already. I will probably say it again. Then I'll probably tell you the same thing. Neither should you. He looked at her for a long time. Then Malcolm reached into his shirt pocket and removed an old key, dark brass, worn smooth at the edges. He placed it on the table between them. What's that? My office cabinet. Bottom drawer. There is a box inside. Not tonight. When you are ready. What's in it? Your mother's letters. Some old papers. Pieces of the man I was. Pieces of why I stopped. Annie stared at the key. It looked too small to open anything so large. Why give it to me now? Because you asked for the true father? His voice was low. That cabinet holds what I was brave enough to keep, and too cowardly to explain. Annie picked up the key. From the kitchen, the oven timer beeped once, forgotten and ordinary. Life continued doing that, she realized. Even after truth arrived, even after men fell, even after fathers became strangers and fathers again in the same hour. She closed her fingers around the key. Not tonight, she said. Malcolm nodded. Not tonight. But both of them knew the door had opened. By morning, the city had already decided it had seen enough to start talking. Annie woke to her phone buzzing against the nightstand. She had slept 3 hours, maybe less. Still half-dressed in the black pants from her shift, the brass key Malcolm had given her resting on the small table beside her lamp. She reached for the phone without opening her eyes and saw 37 messages, 12 missed calls, and a video thumbnail of herself standing in the dining room of the Carter house, pointing at Richard Whitmore while red wine stained the floor. The caption under the most shared clip read, "Young waitress makes billionaire apologize after racist meltdown." Annie stared at the word waitress. Not apprentice, not daughter, not Carter. Waitress. She sat up slowly. Downstairs, she could smell coffee. Strong, dark, already bitter in the pot. Malcolm's coffee. He never slept late, not even after nights that broke open family history and shook the stock value of billionaires. She washed her face, changed into jeans and a Howard University sweatshirt, then picked up the brass key. She held it for a moment, feeling its worn edges press into her palm. Not tonight, she had said. Morning had come too quickly to make that promise feel safe. She left the key on the nightstand and went downstairs. Malcolm stood at the kitchen counter, phone on speaker, one hand around a mug, the other resting flat on the marble. He wore a plain gray sweater, no apron, no restaurant armor. Leon's voice came through the phone. Channel 8 wants comment by 10. The Journal wants confirmation that you are the same Malcolm Carter tied to Carter Private Holdings. Crescent Bank wants documentation before their board call. Halden Group suspended closing pending review. Malcolm saw Annie and took the phone off speaker. "I'll call you back," he said. Leon said something Annie could not hear. Malcolm listened, then ended the call. Annie opened the cabinet, took down a mug, and poured coffee without asking. Malcolm watched her add no sugar, just a little cream. He had taught her that bitter things told the truth faster. "You saw the video," he said. "I saw 5 versions before brushing my teeth." He nodded. "People are going to say many things. They already are. Don't read all of it. That's the kind of advice people give when they know everybody's reading all of it." A tired smile crossed his face. "Fair." She leaned against the counter. "They keep calling me a waitress." His eyes sharpened. "You were working the floor. There's no shame in that. I know that. But they don't mean it like work. They mean it like place." Malcolm did not answer right away. Outside the kitchen window, the morning light sat pale over the back garden. A delivery truck passed on the street beyond the fence. Finally, he said, "Then we correct the meaning, not the work." Annie looked at him. "How? We show up." She almost laughed. "After last night, that's your plan? That has always been the plan." His phone buzzed again. He ignored it. That told her more than the call itself. At 10 minutes before 8, Sarah Jenkins arrived at the house with a bakery box under one arm and a tablet under the other. She did not knock long, just enough to be polite before stepping in. "I brought biscuits," she said. "Not because this is a meeting, because I refuse to discuss crisis management on an empty stomach." Annie looked at the box. "You made those?" Sarah gave her a look. "I manage a restaurant. I don't wake up at 6 to bake for grown people who own ovens." Malcolm said, "Thank you, Sarah. Don't thank me yet. Half the city wants a table. 3 reporters are parked outside the restaurant. One woman from Buckhead called to ask if the rude billionaire table is available for her book club, and Marcus wants to know if he can wear his good shoes today because he might be on television." Annie laughed despite herself. Sarah pointed at her. "Good. You still can. That helps." They sat at the kitchen table. Sarah opened her tablet and laid out the morning, with the precision of a field commander. The Carter house would open, as usual. No press inside. Staff statement at noon. Malcolm would speak briefly, not emotionally, not defensively. Annie would not be forced to speak. If she chose to, Sarah wanted one sentence prepared. Annie frowned. One sentence? Yes, Sarah said. The internet eats paragraphs and misquotes dessert. Malcolm nodded. She's right. Annie folded her arms. So I'm supposed to say what? I was defending my father? Sarah's face softened. That's the truth. It's not all of it. No, Malcolm said. But it is enough for strangers. That word again. Enough. Annie was beginning to hate it. Before she could answer, Malcolm's phone buzzed with a different tone. He checked it, then stood. Leon is here. Sarah looked toward the front hall. Of course he is. Does the man ever use normal entrances? Leon Briggs entered through the side door 2 minutes later, carrying a brown leather folder and wearing the same dark composure from the night before. He greeted Sarah with a nod, Annie with a respectful, Miss Carter, and Malcolm with nothing more than eye contact. Some conversations between them did not need sound. He placed the folder on the table. Whitmore released a statement. Sarah closed her eyes. Let me guess. Misunderstanding, long respect for the community, regrettable emotions. Leon slid a printed page across the table. Annie read aloud. Mr. Whitmore deeply regrets that a private dining disagreement was mischaracterized online. He denies making racially charged remarks and condemns all forms of discrimination. He is reviewing legal options regarding threats made against him by individuals connected to the Carter house. Her hands went cold. He's lying. Yes, Malcolm said. He apologized in front of everyone. Yes. He poured wine on the floor. Yes. He told us to kneel. Malcolm's voice lowered. I know. Annie stood so fast the chair scraped back, then released the whole video. Sarah looked at Malcolm. Leon waited. Malcolm said, Not yet. Annie turned on him. Not yet? He's lying right now, and if we release everything this second, we become part of the morning noise. People choose sides before facts settle. By noon, his legal team will say we edited the footage. By 3, they'll drag up my past. By evening, the story becomes 2 powerful men fighting, and what he did to you disappears. Annie hated that he was making sense. Leon tapped the folder. We do this properly. Time, stamped, footage. Witness statements. Staff statements. Exterior camera. The phone call. The financial notices separate from the restaurant incident. Sarah added, and we keep the staff protected. Marcus and Elise don't need reporters chasing them to their cars. Annie sat down slowly. Malcolm looked at her. Last night you made him say what he did. Today we make sure he cannot unsay it. That helped. Not enough, but some. Leon opened the folder. Inside were printed screenshots, call logs, still frames from security cameras, and a list of names. Annie saw Mrs. Evelyn Price, Marcus Reed, Sarah Jenkins, Luis Ramirez, Elise Walker, Charles Benton, Greg Miller. Her eyes stopped on Charles. He'll talk? Leon said. His lawyer called my lawyer before sunrise. He has a lawyer? He is a lawyer. Sarah reached for a biscuit. Baby, lawyers are the first people to get lawyers. Leon continued. Charles is protecting himself. He will confirm Richard was warned to stop, that the apology occurred, and that the outside men were called by Richard first. And Greg? Annie asked. Greg is currently discovering religion and liquidity risk, Leon said. He may need a few hours. Despite everything, Sarah laughed into her coffee. Malcolm did not. He looked at the folder as if it contained more than documents. It contained the old machine waking up. Evidence, leverage, pressure, timing. Annie could see he knew how to use every piece. She could also see he did not enjoy how naturally it returned to his hands. At 9:30, they drove to the Carter house in Malcolm's black pickup instead of the sedan he used for formal events. Annie rode beside him. Sarah followed in her car. Leon's SUV stayed 2 blocks behind. Close enough to be seen if needed. Far enough not to become a headline. Outside the restaurant, 3 news vans waited. A few neighbors stood across the street. Someone had taped a handwritten sign to the lamppost. We stand with Carter House. Annie stared at it as Malcolm parked in the alley. he noticed. You ready? No. Good. She looked at him. He took the keys from the ignition. Ready people are often just people who haven't thought long enough. That sounded like him. The father she knew. The one who made room for fear without bowing to it. They entered through the back. The kitchen staff was already there. Marcus wore his good shoes. Elise had braided her hair neatly and pretended she had not. Louise had come early despite being told not to. When Malcolm stepped inside, everyone stopped working. For 1 second, nobody knew what to do. Then Mrs. Price's voice came from the dining room. Well, don't stand there looking like somebody died. Some of us came for breakfast. Annie turned. Mrs. Price? The older woman sat at her usual table with coffee and a folded newspaper. Sarah, just entering behind them, stared. We are not open. Mrs. Price sipped her coffee. The door was unlocked. It was not. Then your lock is hospitable. Malcolm looked at her. Mrs. Price. She set the cup down. I figured if reporters are going to camp outside a black-owned restaurant, they should at least see an old black woman sitting inside it, unbothered. The kitchen went quiet again, but this silence was different. Annie felt something loosen in her chest. By 10 o'clock, more regulars arrived. A retired barber, a church deacon, a couple who had celebrated their anniversary there for 12 years. They did not crowd Malcolm. They did not demand details. They ordered coffee, biscuits, shrimp and grits, and sat where cameras outside could see them through the front windows. Not as a mob, as witnesses. At 11:55, Malcolm stood near the host stand. Sarah adjusted the angle of the microphone someone from a local paper had placed outside. Annie stood beside him, not behind him. Leon remained inside, out of camera view. Malcolm looked at her. 1 sentence, if you want. She nodded. They stepped outside. The reporters started shouting at once. Malcolm raised one hand, and somehow the noise dropped. My name is Malcolm Carter, he said. I own the Carter house. Last night, a guest disrespected my staff, my daughter, and this house. He has now chosen to deny what many people witnessed. We will provide the proper records through the proper channels. I will not try this matter on the sidewalk. A reporter called, Mr. Carter, are you connected to Carter Private Holdings? Malcolm paused. Yes. The cameras shifted. Another reporter shouted. Were threats made against Mr. Whitmore? Malcolm said, Mr. Whitmore called men to this restaurant. My people prevented harm. No one touched him. Then he turned to Annie. Her mouth went dry. She looked at the cameras, the neighbors, the regulars inside the window, and finally at her father. She said, I was not trying to become a story. I was telling a man not to mistake my father's dignity for weakness. No one spoke for half a second. Then Mrs. Price, visible through the window, lifted her coffee cup like a toast. Annie almost smiled. Malcolm placed a hand lightly between her shoulders, not guiding her away, just letting her know he was there. Behind the reporters, across the street, a black town car slowed near the curb. The rear window was tinted, but Malcolm saw it. So did Leon from inside. His phone buzzed in Malcolm's pocket a second later. One message. Whitmore sent someone. Malcolm read it, put the phone away, and turned back toward the restaurant. Inside, he said quietly. Annie heard the change in his voice. The morning had only begun. Inside, Malcolm said again, quiet enough that only Annie heard the edge beneath it. She did not argue, not because she had stopped wanting answers, but because she had learned his voice now had layers. The father voice, the owner voice, the old voice. This one carried all three. Sarah Jenkins opened the front door and guided Annie back into the Carter house while reporters shouted over one another behind them. Mr. Carter, who sent the car? Is Richard Whitmore threatening your family? Are you connected to organized crime in Atlanta? The last question hit the air before the door closed. Annie turned at the sound of it, but Malcolm did not. He stepped inside, let Sarah lock the door, then looked through the glass at the black town car across the street. Leon Briggs was already moving from the bar toward the host stand. 3 men, Leon said. Driver stayed in. One in the back seat. One got out and spoke to the reporter in the gray jacket before you came inside. Sarah's mouth tightened. So they're feeding questions. Looks that way. Annie looked from Leon to Malcolm. Richard sent somebody to ask about your past in front of cameras. Malcolm watched the car. Richard is not creative. He is cornered. Mrs. Price, still at her table with coffee, lifted one eyebrow. Cornered animals bite, rich ones hire teeth. A few regulars near the window murmured agreement. Malcolm turned from the glass. Sarah, move everyone away from the front windows. Mrs. Price set her cup down. Malcolm, don't start treating us like porcelain. I'm treating you like people sitting in front of glass. The retired barber, Mr. Harlan, stood and picked up his plate. He's right, Evelyn. Come on. Biscuits taste the same from the other side of the room. Mrs. Price sighed as if the whole city had become inconvenient and moved with him. Annie stayed by the host stand. What are they going to do? Leon answered. Probably nothing here. The car is theater. The reporter is pressure. Whitmore wants the morning story to become your father's past, not his behavior. Annie looked at Malcolm. Then tell them first. Sarah froze slightly. Malcolm turned to her. Tell them what? The truth. Whatever they're going to dig up, say it before they twist it. Leon gave her a small look, not dismissive, considering. Malcolm's face was harder to read. You think truth works like opening a window? No, Annie said. I think lies work better in locked rooms. Mrs. Price called from the back. She's not wrong. Malcolm almost smiled, but it did not stay. His phone rang. He checked the name and answered. Charles. Annie moved closer. Charles Benton's voice came through faintly, tense and breathless. Malcolm did not put him on speaker, but in the quiet restaurant Annie caught enough. Richard's people are pushing your old files, Charles said. They're calling you a racketeer. They're saying last night was intimidation. They're trying to tie the Halden pause to criminal coercion. Malcolm listened. Charles continued, louder now. I'm not calling as your friend. I'm not your friend. But Richard is losing his mind. And if he drags me into this, I will bury him before I let him bury me. I can confirm he called the men first. I can confirm the apology. I can confirm he knew the Auburn deal had collateral problems. Malcolm said, Why? A bitter laugh came through. Because I warned him not to go to that restaurant. He said you were an old ghost and ghosts don't sue. Leon's eyes narrowed. Malcolm asked, Will you put it in writing? I already did. Check your email. The call ended. Sarah exhaled. Well, I never thought I'd say this, but thank God for a scared lawyer. Leon checked his phone. Statement received. Annie looked at Malcolm. So use it. We will. When? Soon. She clenched her jaw. Soon is starting to sound like hiding. That landed. Malcolm looked at her, and for one brief moment, she saw the fatigue behind the control. Annie, he said, when a black man with my history speaks too quickly, people stop hearing words and start hearing what they expected. And when he stays quiet, they write it for him. Exactly. The restaurant went still around that exchange. Not because people were eavesdropping rudely, but because everyone in that room understood some version of it. The cost of speaking. The cost of silence. The old arithmetic of survival. Malcolm looked toward the framed photograph of Annie's mother on the wall. Then he made a decision. Sarah, he said, call the reporters back. Sarah blinked. All of them? The local ones, not the gossip channels. Channel 8, the Atlanta Journal, and the neighborhood paper. Inside. 10 minutes. No live feed. They can record, but we release our own copy too. Leon nodded. Good. Annie stared. You're going to talk? Malcolm looked at her. I'm going to answer what I should have answered before someone like Richard got to ask it first. 10 minutes later, the front dining room had been rearranged. Guests stayed in the east section, not hidden, but seated away from cameras. Sarah placed 3 chairs near the bar for reporters. Marcus set out coffee because Sarah said Americans behaved better when their hands had something warm to hold. Leon stood near the kitchen doors, visible enough to be honest, quiet enough not to become the picture. Malcolm sat at a table beneath the photograph of Annie's mother. Annie sat beside him. A reporter from Channel 8, Denise Caldwell, placed her recorder on the table. She was a black woman in her 50s, with careful eyes and the posture of someone who had covered enough city scandals to know when powerful men were bleeding off camera. Mr. Carter, she said, before we begin, do you want legal counsel present? Leon shifted. Malcolm shook his head. No. I want my daughter present. Denise glanced at Annie, then nodded. All right. A reporter from the Journal asked first. Mr. Carter, were you once known as the Quiet King of Auburn Avenue? The name moved through the restaurant like a draft. Annie felt Malcolm's knee still beside hers. Yes, he said. No one breathed for half a second. Denise followed gently. What did that mean? Malcolm folded his hands on the table. It meant different things to different people. To some, it meant I was dangerous. To some, it meant I could get money where banks would not lend it. To some, it meant I protected businesses others wanted to steal. To others, it meant I was part of the problem. Were you? Yes. Annie looked at him. He did not look back, but his hand shifted slightly closer to hers on the table. The journal reporter leaned in. Were your businesses legal? Some were. Some became legal later. Some should never have existed. Sarah closed her eyes briefly near the host stand. Denise said, "Why say this now?" Malcolm looked at Richard's empty table, now reset with a clean cloth. Because last night a man thought my dignity depended on my public image. It does not. My dignity depends on whether I tell the truth, when it is easier to hide behind power. Annie felt that in her chest. Denise asked, "Did you use old connections to damage Richard Whitmore financially?" Malcolm answered without hesitation. "I used verified financial information to notify parties with legal exposure. Mr. Whitmore's deal was already unstable. His conduct in my restaurant made clear he was a greater liability than some wanted to admit." The neighborhood paper reporter, a younger man with a nervous pen, asked, "Why not let the police handle the threat last night?" Sarah could not help herself. "We did call them." Everyone looked at her. She straightened. "I called. They arrived after Mr. Whitmore left. We have the report number." Malcolm nodded. "My first responsibility was to keep my guests and staff safe. No one was touched. No weapon was shown. The men Mr. Whitmore called left because they recognized the mistake before making it worse." Denise looked at Annie. "Miss Carter, did you know about your father's past?" Annie's mouth went dry. Malcolm turned toward the reporter. "That question is for me." Annie put her hand on the table. "No, it's for me." Malcolm stopped. She looked at Denise. "I knew my father was respected. I knew he was private. I did not know the name people used for him. I did not know everything he had done." Denise asked, "How do you feel about learning it this way?" Annie looked at Malcolm, then at the room. Sarah, Marcus, Mrs. Price, Mr. Harlan, Leon, the photographs on the walls, the staff who had returned because work still had to happen. "I'm angry," she said. "I'm proud. I'm confused. All of that can be true at once." Denise nodded slowly. Annie continued, "But what happened last night did not happen because my father has a past. It happened because Richard Whitmore walked into a black-owned restaurant, saw people serving him, and thought service meant submission." The reporters wrote quickly. Malcolm looked at his daughter, and this time he did not hide the pride. The journal reporter asked, "What happens now?" Malcolm said, "Now Mr. Whitmore answers for what he said, what he threatened, and what his company tried to do to the Auburn neighborhood. My past will not be used as a curtain for his present." His phone buzzed. Leon checked his own at the same moment. His expression changed. "What?" Malcolm asked. Leon looked at the reporters, then at Annie. "Whitmore Holdings just called an emergency board meeting." Greg Miller's name flashed on Leon's screen next. Then Charles Benton's. Then another alert came in from a financial news feed. Sarah read it aloud from her tablet before anyone else could. "Whitmore Holdings shares fall sharply after Halden Group suspends acquisition deal amid collateral review and misconduct allegations." Silence. Mrs. Price's voice came from the east dining room. "Well," she said, lifting her coffee, "that man should have eaten his free short ribs and gone home." For the first time all morning, even Malcolm laughed. Not loudly, but enough for Annie to hear the father beneath the legend. The laugh did not last long, but it changed the room. For a few seconds. The Carter house sounded like itself again. Mrs. Price's dry remark moved from table to table. Easing shoulders, softening faces. Marcus laughed behind the bar and pretended to polish a glass that was already clean. Sarah Jenkins looked down at her tablet, smiling despite the storm building outside. Even Leon Briggs allowed the corner of his mouth to move, which Annie suspected was his version of applause. Then Malcolm's phone rang. The name on the screen took the smile from his face. Crescent Bank. He let it ring twice before answering. "Carter." Annie sat beside him, close enough to hear only the tone, not every word. The voice on the other end was polished, urgent, and careful. a man trying not to sound afraid while asking questions fear had written for him. Malcolm listened without interrupting. "No," he said finally. "I will not walk back my concern." Another pause. "You guaranteed Whitmore's position based on documents that deserve review. That is not my fault. That is your risk department's." He listened again, eyes fixed on the clean tablecloth in front of him. "If your board wants to know whether I stand behind the information, the answer is yes. If they want to know whether I intended market movement, the answer is no. I intended daylight." The restaurant went quiet around that word. Daylight. Annie looked at him. She had heard her father talk about heat, timing, discipline, food, manners, debt, and dignity. But daylight was different. It sounded like something he had once needed and not always given. Malcolm ended the call and set the phone face down. Sarah stepped closer. "How bad?" "Bad for Whitmore. And for us?" Leon answered. "Manageable if everyone stays disciplined." Sarah looked at him. "People keep saying disciplined like that makes coffee taste better." "It keeps subpoenas shorter," Leon said. Denise Caldwell from Channel 8 had stayed behind with permission. Her recorder now turned off. She closed her notebook. "Mr. Carter, off the record. This is not going to stay local." Malcolm nodded. "I know. The old name, the restaurant, the video, Whitmore's statement, the neighborhood deal. It's all too clean for national producers to ignore." Annie said, "Clean?" Denise looked at her with the tired kindness of a woman who knew how stories got packaged. "I don't mean morally clean. I mean easy to sell. Billionaire, black-owned restaurant, hidden past, daughter standing up for her father. By tonight, people who have never set foot in Atlanta will have opinions about your family." Annie leaned back. "Great." Malcolm glanced at her. "You don't have to carry that." She gave him a look. "Daddy, I was in the video." Before he could respond, Leon's phone buzzed. He read the message, then looked at Malcolm. "Emergency board meeting moved up. Whitmore Holdings is putting Richard on leave pending internal review." Greg Miller walked in 3 seconds later. No one had expected him. He entered through the front door without the swagger he had carried the night before. His hair was combed too quickly, his shirt collar sat wrong, and he held both hands where everyone could see them, as if entering a church after gambling in the parking lot. Sarah moved toward him. "Mr. Miller, we are not open to walk-ins right now. I'm not here to eat." Greg looked at Malcolm, then Annie, then back at Malcolm. "I need to talk." Leon shifted. "You can talk from there." Greg stopped just inside the door. "Fine." Malcolm stood. "Say what you came to say." Greg swallowed. Richard lied. "Mrs. Price, from the East dining room, said, we established that over coffee." Greg glanced toward her, then quickly away. "I mean about more than last night." Charles Benton entered behind him, slower, carrying a leather briefcase. He looked as if he had aged since midnight. Sarah stared at him. "Did the two of you coordinate your dramatic entrance?" Charles said. "Unfortunately, no. Greg called me from the curb because he didn't want to come in alone." Greg muttered, "I didn't say it like that." "You absolutely did," Charles said. Malcolm did not smile. "Why are you here?" Charles set the briefcase on a table but did not open it. "Because Richard is trying to blame everyone else before the board removes him. You, me, Greg, the lender, the market, the weather. If he can find a memo. He's telling people you coerced him, that your men threatened him, and that he only apologized because he feared physical harm." Leon said, "That is foolish." Charles looked at him. "He is past foolish." Greg spoke quickly. "I'll give a statement. I heard him call the men. I heard him threaten the restaurant. I heard him tell them to break in if the door was locked." Annie stared at him. "Last night you laughed." Greg flinched. "I know. You laughed when he told us to kneel." His face reddened. "I know. Then why should anyone trust you now?" Greg opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Because I'm scared." Annie almost laughed. "That's your reason?" "It's the honest one." Greg looked at Malcolm. "I invested with Richard because he won. That's what I cared about. He won deals, he won rooms, he won arguments. Last night, I saw what he looks like when he can't win, and I realized every man standing near him becomes useful or disposable. I don't want to be disposable." Mrs. Price called, Fear is not repentance, but it can be a beginning. Greg looked like he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. Charles opened the briefcase. I have emails. Not all of them. Enough. Richard knew the Auburn properties included protected family parcels and minority-owned businesses that required separate review. He pushed to close before those objections surfaced. He also knew the collateral structure was questionable. Malcolm's eyes lowered to the file. Annie felt him go still. This was not only about spilled wine anymore. Maybe it never had been. Sarah stepped forward. Are you saying he planned to push families out illegally? Charles chose his words carefully. I'm saying he planned to make resistance too expensive for them to continue. The restaurant changed again. Mr. Harlan, the retired barber, rose from his seat. My sister's house is on Auburn. Charles looked at him. Then she needs a lawyer before Monday. Malcolm turned to Leon. Call Pastor Bell. Call Janice Rowe at the housing clinic. Call the Bar Association referral line. Quietly at first. We need names, addresses, documents, deeds, tax notices, every family affected. Leon was already typing. On it, Annie watched her father shift from wounded parent to commander. No rage. No wasted motion. Just responsibility. Finding a target. She understood then why people had once feared him, but she also understood why others had followed him. When Malcolm Carter decided something mattered, the room stopped drifting. Denise Caldwell reopened her notebook. Mr. Carter, may I put that on record? Malcolm looked at Mr. Harlan. Not until the families are ready. They are not props for a news cycle. Denise nodded. Fair. Greg looked at Annie. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. She held his gaze. For laughing or for getting caught beside the wrong man? He winced. Both, probably. That's not an apology. That's inventory. Charles let out the smallest breath, almost a laugh, then covered it. Greg nodded. You're right. I'm sorry I laughed when Richard humiliated your father. I'm sorry I joined in because it was easier than being decent, and I'm sorry it took fear for me to say it. Annie did not forgive him. Not yet. But she believed that sentence more than the first one. Malcolm looked at Greg. Give your statement to Leon, then leave my restaurant. Greg nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Charles lingered. Malcolm. Mr. Carter. Annie corrected before she could stop herself. Charles looked at her, then dipped his head. Mr. Carter. Richard's board may ask whether you will settle quietly. Malcolm's face gave nothing away. Settle what? The public matter. The statements. The financial pressure. If he resigns, issues a broader apology, withdraws from Auburn, and covers legal aid for affected families, they may ask whether you'll stop pushing. Annie turned to her father. She expected him to say no. Part of her wanted him to crush Richard until nothing remained but a lesson. Malcolm looked toward the dining room windows, where regulars sat in plain view of cameras, drinking coffee like a quiet wall. Then he said, I don't need Richard Whitmore destroyed. I need him unable to harm the people he thought were beneath him. Leon looked up. Those are different strategies. I know. Annie studied her father. There it was again. The old power, held by the throat. Sarah said softly, and if he refuses? Malcolm picked up the file Charles had brought and handed it to Leon. Then daylight gets brighter. Outside, another news van pulled to the curb. Inside, Mrs. Price raised her cup again and said, Well, somebody warm the biscuits. Justice is easier to watch with butter. By early afternoon, the Carter house no longer looked like a restaurant caught in scandal. It looked like a neighborhood deciding where to stand. Cars lined both sides of the street. Some belonged to reporters, but most belonged to regular people. Church mothers, retired teachers, barbers, nurses, contractors, former waitresses, men in work boots, women in Sunday hats, though it was Saturday, families who had eaten at the Carter house after funerals, graduations, anniversaries, and ordinary paydays when ordinary people wanted one good meal served with respect. Sarah Jenkins stood by the front door with a clipboard and the expression of a woman willing to fight weather, press, or foolishness with the same pen. We are not doing interviews at tables, she told a young producer trying to charm his way inside. We are not filming guests without permission. We are not blocking the sidewalk. And if one more person calls this a viral restaurant, I will personally introduce them to the alley exit. The producer blinked. Are you the owner? No, Sarah said. That's why I'm still polite. Inside, Annie stood behind the bar helping Marcus refill coffee cups. She had changed into a clean black shirt, but the name tag remained. Annie. Not Carter. Not daughter. Not the girl from the video. Just Annie. Marcus leaned close and murmured, "For the record, I did wear my good shoes." She glanced down. Brown leather, polished to a shine. "They're nice. My aunt texted and said if I'm going to be background in history, I should not look dusty." Annie laughed, and it felt strange to hear herself do it. At the corner table, Mrs. Price had become unofficial command. People kept stopping by to ask what happened, and she kept telling them the same thing. A rich man behaved poorly, a young woman told the truth, and Malcolm Carter remembered he owns more than a kitchen. Mr. Harlan, the retired barber, sat beside her, reading the printed statement Charles Benton had provided. His hands shook once when he saw the street names listed under the Auburn redevelopment file. "My sister's block is here," he said. Malcolm stood across from him, sleeves rolled, no apron now. "We're going to get her help. She paid that house off in '98. I know. She still keeps my mother's Bible in the front room." "I know." Mr. Harlan looked up. "You don't know everything, Malcolm." "No," Malcolm said, "but I know enough to start." That was how the afternoon changed. It stopped being only about Richard Whitmore. The wine, the insult, the apology, the video, all of it became the door. Behind that door sat deeds, loans, pressure letters, rezoning language, quiet threats, and families who had been told they were sentimental obstacles in the path of progress. Leon sat up at the staff meal table with 2 laptops and 3 phones. He looked like a man running a war from a lunch counter. Beside him, Janice Rowe from the housing clinic arrived with reading glasses, a canvas tote full of legal pads, and no patience for drama. "Mr. Carter," she said, shaking Malcolm's hand. "I heard you finally let your past be useful in public." Malcolm gave her a look. "Good afternoon, Janice." "It is not good yet. It is busy." She turned to Annie. "You the daughter?" Annie nodded. Janice studied her. "Good backbone. Keep it. But sleep when older women tell you to." "I'll try." "That means no." "We'll work on it." By 3 o'clock, affected families began coming in through the back entrance to avoid cameras. Sarah seated them in the private dining room. Coffee, water, biscuits, and soup went out without anyone asking. Malcolm insisted on food. "People think clearer when they're not hungry," he said. Annie carried a tray into the room and saw faces she recognized from the neighborhood. Mrs. Bell, who sold pound cakes at church fundraisers. Mr. Adams, who fixed porch railings. The twins who ran the small print shop near Auburn. A woman who had cut Annie's hair when she was in middle school. They did not look like case files. They looked tired. Mrs. Bell held a letter in both hands. They said if I didn't sign by Monday, legal fees would eat up whatever offer was left. Janice read the letter, then looked at Malcolm. Predatory timeline. Leon said, same language in 3 others. Mr. Adams placed a folder on the table. They sent a man to my house. Said my property taxes had irregularities. I knew that was nonsense. I pay early every year. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Name? Didn't give one. White fellow, gray suit, smile like a locked door. Annie wrote that down without being asked. Leon noticed. You taking notes, Miss Carter? Yes. Good. Write dates when they remember them. Times if they can. Small details matter. Annie looked at the people around the table. All right, who came first? For the next hour, she listened. Not as the girl from the video. Not as Malcolm's protected daughter. As someone old enough to understand that dignity could be stolen in paperwork as easily as in a dining room. A man could pour wine on the floor and tell you to kneel. A company could send a letter with legal language and do the same thing more slowly. At 4:15, Sarah appeared at the door. Malcolm, Whitmore Holdings, issued another statement. The room quieted. Malcolm stepped out with Annie and Leon. Sarah handed him her tablet. He read it once. Annie watched his face. What does it say? She asked. Sarah answered, flat. Richard Whitmore is taking a temporary leave of absence. The board has opened an internal review. The Auburn redevelopment transaction is paused pending community consultation. Mrs. Bell, still seated inside, whispered, paused is not stopped. Malcolm looked at her. No, ma'am. But paused means they are breathing through their mouth now. Mrs. Price, somehow appearing behind Sarah with fresh coffee, said, "I do enjoy a board meeting with shortness of breath." Even Janice smiled. Leon's phone buzzed again. He read the message, then looked at Malcolm. "Richard wants to speak with you privately." Annie's head snapped up. "No." Malcolm did not answer. Sarah crossed her arms. "I agree with Annie, which is always dangerous." Leon said, "He's asking for a call. Says he has terms." "Terms," Annie said. "He poured wine on our floor and now he has terms?" Malcolm looked toward the front windows. Reporters still waited outside. Regulars still sat inside. Families in the private room held documents that had almost cost them homes. "What are his terms?" Malcolm asked. Leon checked the message. "He'll issue a stronger apology. He'll withdraw personally from the Auburn-Neliburn deal. He'll blame aggressive advisors and say he acted under stress. In exchange, he wants you to stop releasing information and publicly state last night is resolved." Annie laughed once. "So he wants to buy silence with better wording." Janice Rose stepped into the hall. "That man does not get to resolve my clients without my clients." Malcolm nodded. "Correct." Leon looked at him. "Do you want the call?" "Yes." "Malcolm," Annie said. He turned to her. "I'm not taking it alone." 5 minutes later, they gathered in the small office behind the kitchen. Malcolm, Annie, Leon, Sarah, Janice, and Denise Caldwell from Channel 8, who was allowed to witness but not record until told. Malcolm placed his phone on the desk and put the call on speaker. Richard answered before the first ring finished. "Carter." Malcolm sat back. "Mr. Whitmore." Richard sounded hoarse, stripped of the dining room thunder. "You made your point." "No," Annie said before she could stop herself. "You felt consequences. That is not the same thing." "Silence," Richard said. "Is your daughter on this call?" Malcolm answered. "Yes. I asked to speak privately. You lost that privilege when you made my family public." Richard breathed hard through his nose. "Fine. I'll apologize again. Properly. I'll step away from Auburn. I'll make donations to whatever community group you want. But this stops today." Janice leaned toward the phone. "Who exactly are you asking to stop, Mr. Whitmore? Mr. Carter, the families, the bank, the board, or the truth?" "Who is that?" "Janice Rowe. Attorney for several homeowners your people pressured." Richard cursed under his breath. Sarah said, "Speakerphone, Mr. Whitmore." Another silence. Richard tried again. "Look, mistakes were made." Annie closed her eyes. Malcolm said, "Say that sentence correctly." "What?" "Mistakes did not make themselves." Richard's voice hardened. "I said I'll apologize." "To whom?" "To you, your daughter, the staff, and the families on Auburn." A pause. Richard said, "That's a separate business matter." "No," Malcolm said. "That is the same sickness wearing a suit." Denise looked up sharply at that line. Richard snapped, "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Malcolm's voice lowered. "No. Men like you always think accountability is revenge because revenge is the only language you respect." No one in the office moved. Richard said, quieter, "What do you want?" Malcolm looked at Janice. She nodded once. Malcolm spoke clearly. "Full withdrawal from the Auburn redevelopment deal. Written apology naming the racial insult. The threat against my restaurant. And the pressure campaign against property owners. Legal fund for affected families, administered independently. Cooperation with the board review. And you resign as chairman before your board pretends to discover courage." Richard laughed bitterly. "You want my company." "No," Malcolm said. "I want you unable to use it as a weapon. That's not a negotiation. It was never meant to be." Richard said nothing for so long Annie thought the call had dropped. Then he whispered, "If I refuse." Leon answered softly, "Then tomorrow we'll arrive with documents." Richard hung up. Annie stared at the phone. Sarah said, "Well, that was rude." Janice gathered her papers. It was also fear. Malcolm stood. "Then we keep working." Annie followed him back into the hallway. "Do you think he'll agree?" Malcolm looked toward the private dining room, where neighbors bent over paperwork under warm light, their coffee cups full, their voices low but steadier now. "I don't know," he said. But tonight, he is no longer deciding alone. Outside, the sun had begun to lower over Atlanta. Inside the Carter house, dinner service had not yet begun, but the kitchen was already moving. People still had to eat, and justice, Annie was learning, did not excuse anybody from setting the table. Dinner service began at 6, because Malcolm Carter refused to let Richard Whitmore turn the Carter house into a courthouse with table linens. By then, the restaurant had changed shape. The front dining room still served guests, but the private room had become a quiet legal clinic. Janice Rowe sat at the head of a long table with reading glasses low on her nose, sorting letters into piles. Leon Briggs had 2 phones, 1 laptop, and the patience of a man who could wait all night for someone else to make a mistake. Sarah moved between rooms with coffee, menus, updates, and the kind of authority that made people sit straighter, without knowing why. Annie worked the floor, not because anyone asked her to, because standing still made her thoughts too loud. She carried shrimp and grits to table 4, refilled sweet tea for Mrs. Price, brought Mr. Harlan extra hot sauce, and answered a reporter's question with, "Sir, if you're not ordering dinner, Sarah will show you the sidewalk." Sarah heard it from 10 feet away and said, "Good answer, softer next time." At 7:30, the first real break in the case arrived through a woman named Loretta Bell, who came in wearing a green church suit, orthopedic shoes, and the face of someone who had been polite through too many insults. She placed a folder in front of Janice. "My nephew told me I should bring this," she said. "I almost threw it out." Janice opened it. Malcolm stood behind her. Annie leaned close enough to see a letter from Whitmore Holdings. Polite on top and threatening underneath. Janice read silently, then looked up. "Mrs. Bell, did someone come to your house after this?" "Yes, ma'am. Man in a gray suit. Said if I didn't sign, the city might decide my porch wasn't up to code." Malcolm's eyes sharpened. Leon asked, "Did he give a name?" "No, but he left a card." Mrs. Bell reached into her purse and pulled out a small white business card. "Only reason I kept it was because he put his coffee cup on my piano without a coaster. I wanted to remember the kind of man he was." Mrs. Price, from the doorway, said, "That is evidence and judgment. Efficient." Leon took the card and read the name. Peter Voss. Whitmore Community Transition Consultant. Sarah snorted. "That title sounds like a threat in khakis." Janice held out her hand. "May I?" Leon gave her the card. She took a photo and looked at Malcolm. "This connects the pressure letters to Whitmore's redevelopment team." Malcolm nodded. "How many families?" "Enough to make this ugly," Janice said. "Not enough yet to make it undeniable." Annie looked at the folders spread across the table. "Then we get more." Malcolm glanced at her. "You have been on your feet since morning. So has everybody else. That is not an argument. It is if you taught me by example." Mrs. Price made a satisfied sound. "She got you there, Malcolm." He gave the older woman a look. "You are enjoying this too much. I am old. Enjoyment is medicine." The room almost laughed. Then Leon's phone buzzed. He read the message and his face went still. "Board vote in 20 minutes, he said. "Richard is trying to resign with a severance package and non-disparagement protection." Sarah stared. "He wants to be paid to leave quietly?" Janice's mouth flattened. "Of course he does." Annie looked at Malcolm. "Can they give it to him?" "They can try," Leon added. "If they think silence costs less than scandal, yes." Malcolm looked toward the dining room, where people were eating beneath photographs of families who had fought harder battles with less language and fewer lawyers. "Then they need to understand scandal is already at the table." He turned to Denise Caldwell, who had been waiting near the bar with her recorder off and a cup of coffee untouched. "Miss Caldwell," Malcolm said, "are you still willing to record a statement from affected homeowners?" Denise straightened. "If they want to speak. Only if they want to." Mrs. Bell lifted her chin. "I'll speak." Mr. Harlan stepped into the private room. "So will I." One by one, people looked at each other and decided. Not everyone. Some were afraid. Malcolm did not push them. That mattered to Annie. He could have. He had the presence for it, the name, the old machinery. Instead, he said, "Nobody owes the public their pain. If you speak, speak, because you choose to." Mrs. Bell sat in front of Denise's camera with both hands folded over her purse. "My name is Loretta Bell," she said. "My husband bought our house in 1979. He worked 2 jobs, and I worked at Grady Hospital. We raised 3 children there. Last month, a man from Whitmore's team told me I was standing in the way of progress. I would like to know when my life became an obstruction." Denise did not interrupt. Mr. Harlan spoke next. Then the print shop twins. Then a retired bus driver named Calvin Reese, who said he had been offered less for his home than Richard spent on the wine he poured onto Malcolm's floor. That line traveled through the room. Annie wrote names, dates, street addresses. Her handwriting got worse as her hand tired. Malcolm noticed and placed a glass of water beside her. She looked up. Don't what? Don't take care of me like I'm about to break. His voice softened. Taking care of you is not an accusation. She looked away first. By 8:15, the board of Whitmore Holdings had not yet announced anything. Leon paced for the first time all night. That made everyone nervous. At 8:22, Charles Benton called Malcolm. Malcolm put him on speaker in the office with Annie, Sarah, Leon, and Janice present. Charles sounded exhausted. They're splitting. Leon leaned forward. How many? Enough to stall. Richard has allies who want to frame this as a personal embarrassment, not a governance issue. They're offering resignation, severance, apology, withdrawal from Auburn, and a clause preventing further claims from parties tied to Carter. Janice said, absolutely not. Charles paused. Who is that? The woman who will make your life difficult if that clause touches my clients. Noted, Charles said. Malcolm asked, what does Richard want most? Silence, Charles said. He knows the apology hurts. The resignation hurts. Losing Auburn hurts. But the family pressure campaign tied to the collateral issue could bring regulators. That is what he wants buried. Annie looked at the papers on the table. Then that's where he's guilty, Charles said. Miss Carter, in my line of work we say exposed. In mine, Annie said, we say guilty. Sarah murmured, I am beginning to love this child's line of work. Malcolm ignored that, but not entirely. Charles, tell the board this. I will not sign silence. I will not ask families to trade their homes for his comfort. He withdraws without conditions, funds legal aid without control, releases affected homeowners from pressure agreements, and resigns without severance tied to non-disparagement. Charles exhaled. They'll say that's too much. Then tell them I am still being polite. The room went quiet. Charles said, I believe they will understand the implication. No implication, Malcolm said. Just English. The call ended. Annie stared at her father. That sounded like the old you. Malcolm did not deny it. Some tools are not evil. What matters is what you build or break with them. And what are you building? He looked through the office window toward the dining room, where Mrs. Bell sat with soup in a blanket Sarah had brought from the staff closet. A door those families can walk through without paying a toll to a man like Richard. Annie wanted to stay angry. Part of her still was. But the answer reached her. At 9:03, Whitmore Holdings issued its statement. Sarah read it from her tablet in the dining room because by then half the restaurant was waiting with coffee gone cold. Richard Whitmore has resigned as chairman effective immediately. The Auburn redevelopment transaction is terminated. Whitmore Holdings will cooperate with an independent review of the transaction process and establish a legal relief fund administered by a third party for affected property owners. Nobody cheered at first. People were too tired to trust good news quickly. Janice read the statement herself, lips moving. Then she looked at Mrs. Bell. Terminated means stopped. Mrs. Bell covered her mouth. Mr. Harlan lowered his head. Marcus whispered, damn. Sarah said, language. He said, sorry. Mrs. Price stood slowly. Well, I am not sorry. Damn is correct. The laugh that followed broke something open. Not victory exactly. Relief. The kind that came when people had been holding their breath for longer than they realized. Annie looked at Malcolm. He was not smiling. He was watching the families. Leon came beside him. You got what you asked for. Malcolm said, no. They got a chance to keep what was already theirs. Annie heard the difference. Later, after the families left and the reporters packed up, after Sarah sent the staff home with extra pay and leftover biscuits, after Leon Weary took the last folder and promised to return at 8, Annie found Malcolm alone in the dining room. He stood by Richard's table. The clean tablecloth had been removed again. The table was bare wood now, warm and dark under the light. Annie stood beside him. Do you regret it? Which part? Any of it. He took a long breath. I regret that you learned who I was from a man trying to wound me. She nodded. But not what happened to Richard? No. Not the stock, the board, the deal? No. She looked at him. Because he deserved it? Malcolm's eyes remained on the table. Because if power only protects itself, it rots. Tonight, for once, mine protected someone else. Annie thought of the key upstairs at home, the cabinet, the box, her mother's letters. She said, "I'm ready to open it." Malcolm looked at her then, not surprised, not eager, afraid, maybe, but willing. "Tonight?" She nodded. "Tonight." He reached for his coat. "Then we go home." As they walked toward the back door, Mrs. Price's voice floated from the front, where she was still somehow putting on her gloves slowly enough to hear everything. "Malcolm," he turned. "Yes, ma'am?" "Next time a billionaire comes in, make him pay in advance." For the first time that night, Annie and Malcolm laughed together. They drove home through a quieter Atlanta than the one that had watched them all day. The streets near the Carter house were almost empty, washed in amber light from the lamps and the soft glow of closed storefronts. Annie sat in the passenger seat of Malcolm's black pickup with the window cracked just enough to let in the cool air. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much. And for once, Annie did not want to throw the first question just to make the silence move. Malcolm kept both hands on the wheel. He drove the way he did everything when he was thinking, steady, without waste. At a red light near Auburn Avenue, he looked left toward the old blocks that Richard Whitmore had nearly turned into numbers on a deal sheet. Barbershops, brick churches, small houses with porch lights still on, a mural of a woman holding a basket of peaches. A city that had survived men with better suits than morals. Annie noticed his face. "You thought he might win." Malcolm did not look at her. "Men like Richard win all the time, but not tonight." "No," he said, "not tonight." The light changed. He drove on. Their house sat behind a low iron gate on a tree-lined street south of Midtown. It was not loud wealth. No fountain, no marble lions, no driveway meant to impress strangers, just a warm brick house with wide steps, a porch swing, and rosemary growing near the kitchen window because Annie's mother had planted it there and Malcolm refused to let it die. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar, coffee, and the lemon oil Malcolm used on the dining table every Sunday. Annie paused in the hallway. She had grown up here thinking she knew what every sound meant. The hum of the old refrigerator, the creak on the fourth stair, the way rain tapped against the back windows. Tonight, even the familiar things seemed to be waiting. Malcolm hung his coat on the hook by the door. "You still want to do this?" Annie held out her hand. In her palm lay the brass key. "Yes." He nodded, then led her down the hall to his office. She had been in that room many times, but never like this. As a child, she used to spin in his leather chair while he reviewed invoices. In high school, she came in to ask for gas money, college advice, or permission to go somewhere he would say no to, before eventually saying yes with conditions. The office had always seemed boring in a comforting way. Shelves of cookbooks, framed permits, old photographs, a desk too neat to be trusted. Now Malcolm crossed to the cabinet along the back wall and stopped. "You open it," he said. Annie slid the key into the bottom drawer. It turned with a soft click. Inside was a wooden box, dark and plain, with no lock. Malcolm carried it to the desk and stepped back. Annie looked at him. "You're not going to sit?" "I don't know if I deserve to." She hated that answer. She also understood it. "Sit down, Daddy." He did. Annie lifted the lid. The first thing inside was a photograph of her mother, Simone Carter, standing in front of the Carter house before the sign had been installed. She wore jeans, a white blouse, and a headscarf, one hand on her hip, smiling at whoever held the camera. On the back, in her handwriting, were the words, "Build something that feeds more than hunger." Annie touched the ink with one finger. "She wrote that?" Malcolm's voice was quiet. "The day we bought the building, you never showed me. I couldn't explain it without explaining everything around it. That was your mistake." "Yes." No defense, no argument. Annie set the photo aside. Beneath it were old newspaper clippings, folded contracts, photographs of men Annie did not recognize, a few letters tied with a faded ribbon, and a business card yellowed at the edges. Malcolm E. Carter. Private investments. Annie turned it over. On the back, in her mother's handwriting, was another line. "Power is only beautiful when it protects someone." Annie read it twice. Then again. Malcolm looked at the card as if it had once been a mirror. "She gave me that after a night I almost didn't come home," he said. Annie's fingers tightened around the card. Almost? He nodded. There was a dispute over a property near Edgewood. I had men ready. Other men had men ready. Your mother stood in our kitchen, pregnant with you, and told me if I walked out to prove I could win, I might win the street and lose my house. What did you do? I went anyway. Annie looked up. Malcolm did not look away. That is why the card mattered. Not because I listened the first time, because I didn't. The room seemed to settle around that. What happened? I won. His mouth tightened. And when I came home, your mother was sitting at this desk, with that card in front of her. She said, Malcolm, every time you use power to protect your pride, you make the world less safe for the people you claim to love. Annie looked down at the words again. Power is only beautiful when it protects someone. Did you change after that? Not all at once. People never do. He looked at her with a tired softness. No, they don't. She opened the bundle of letters. The first was addressed to Malcolm in Simone's careful handwriting. Annie did not read the whole thing. It felt too private. But one sentence caught her before she could look away. I am not asking you to become harmless. I am asking you to become responsible for the harm you are capable of doing. Annie swallowed. That sounds like Mom. It does. Did she forgive you? Malcolm looked toward the window. She loved me. Forgiveness came in pieces. Annie folded the letter carefully and placed it back. Beneath the letters was a small black and white photograph of Malcolm much younger, standing beside Leon Briggs and 3 other men outside a closed nightclub. Young Malcolm looked nothing like the father who packed her lunches. His face was leaner, harder. His eyes seemed to dare the world to reach for him and find out the cost. Annie slid the photo toward him. Were these your men? Yes. Did they love you or fear you? Both. That was the problem. She thought of Leon calling him boss. The respect, the caution, the long memory. Does Leon still love you? Malcolm let out a small breath. Leon would say that is a sentimental question. What would you say? I would say yes, in his way. And you? I owe him more than I can repay. I also owe him a better version of me than the one he followed. Annie nodded slowly. The last item in the box was a restaurant napkin, old but clean, with a sketch of the Carter House logo in blue ink. Simone's handwriting again. Carter House. Let the name mean shelter, not fear. Annie felt tears come then, sudden and inconvenient. She wiped them quickly, but Malcolm saw. I'm sorry, he said. For what part? All the parts that made you ask that. She almost smiled through the hurt. That's too broad to be useful. You get that from your mother? Good. He nodded. Yes, good. Annie sat back, the business card still in her hand. When Richard said I'd learn what kind of man you really are, I got scared. So did I. I thought maybe he knew something that would take you away from me. Malcolm's voice roughened. Annie, she looked at him. But the worst part is, he did know something. Not all of it. Not the real thing. But enough to hurt. Malcolm leaned forward. My past is real. His use of it was a weapon. Those are not the same. I know. Do you? I'm trying. He accepted that. For a while, they sat with the open box between them. Outside, a car passed. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. Somewhere upstairs, the old house settled into itself. Annie placed the business card on the desk between them. Power is only beautiful when it protects someone, she said. Is that what you did tonight? Malcolm answered slowly. I hope so. You also protected your pride. Yes. She appreciated that he did not lie. Did it feel good? She asked. His eyes closed briefly. For a moment, that answer hurt, but it was the right kind of hurt. Clean, honest. And after? After I remembered you were watching. Annie looked at the card, then at him. I was watching before that too. When you apologized. When you tried to feed him instead of break him. I hated it then. And now? I still hate some of it. He nodded. But I understand more. Malcolm looked at her then, fully, the way he had looked at Richard when the room changed, but without the coldness. Understanding is more than I had a right to expect tonight. You don't get to decide what I can handle anymore. No, he said, I don't. She picked up the napkin with Simone's sketch. The Carter House should do the community dinner every month. He blinked. What? For the neighborhood. Legal clinic if needed. Free meals. People bring paperwork. Questions. Stories. Not charity. Shelter. Malcolm looked at the napkin, then at her. Your mother would have liked that. I know. You sure you want to take that on? No, Annie said. But you said ready people are often just people who haven't thought long enough. A slow smile crossed his face. Using my words against me? Responsibly. He laughed. Quiet and real. Annie put the card back in the box, but not at the bottom. On top. Tomorrow, she said, we start planning. Tomorrow? Yes. Tonight we sleep. Malcolm looked relieved and wrecked at the same time. That may be the wisest thing said in this house all day. She stood, then hesitated beside his chair. Daddy? Yes? I'm still angry. I know. I still love you. His face changed, not dramatically. Malcolm Carter was not a dramatic man when something mattered, but the words reached him. They went past the owner, past the old name, past the boss, straight to the father who had spent years trying to become worthy of the daughter standing in front of him. I love you too, he said. Annie leaned down and kissed his cheek. Then she left the office, carrying nothing but the smell of old paper, her mother's handwriting, and the knowledge that truth could hurt without destroying what it touched. Behind her, Malcolm stayed seated for a long time, looking at the open box. At last, he picked up Simone's business card and read the words again. Power is only beautiful when it protects someone. For the first time in years, he did not read them like a warning. He read them like instructions. By the following month, the Carter house had a new table in the private dining room. It was not the best table, not the one by the window where guests like to be seen, not the long walnut table used for wine dinners and anniversary parties. It was a plain oak table Malcolm ordered from a carpenter 2 blocks over, wide enough for food, paperwork, elbows, and the kind of tired hands that needed somewhere to rest. Sarah Jenkins hated it at first. It doesn't match, she said, standing with both hands on her hips. Malcolm looked at the table. Good. Annie, carrying a stack of clean coffee cups, stopped beside him. That is not a design philosophy. It is when the room has been too polished for too long. Sarah sighed. You two are going to become impossible together. We already were, Annie said. The first community dinner began on a Thursday evening, because Annie argued weekends felt too much like charity events, and Tuesdays made people suspicious. Malcolm did not ask why Tuesdays made people suspicious. He had learned that sometimes his daughter's logic arrived before the explanation and still turned out right. The sign outside read, Carter House Community Supper. Bring questions. Bring papers. Bring somebody who needs a meal. No cameras were invited. A few came anyway and were met at the door by Sarah. This is not a press event, she told them. This is supper. If you are hungry, you may come in and eat. If you are fishing for tears, the sidewalk is available. Mrs. Price arrived early in a purple coat and declared the whole thing poorly organized because nobody had given her authority, then sat at the oak table and began telling people where to place their folders. Mr. Harlan brought his sister, who brought 3 neighbors. Janice Rowe came with 2 young attorneys from the housing clinic. Marcus wore his good shoes again. Luis brought his mother. Elise brought extra pens because, as she said, somebody always needs a pen right when truth starts happening. Leon Briggs stood near the back wall for the first hour, arms folded, watching the room. Annie noticed and walked over. You planning to guard the cornbread all night? Leon looked down at her. Cornbread has started wars in more families than money. That almost sounds true. It is true enough. She studied him for a second. You don't have to stand in the shadows here. His expression changed slightly. Habit. Daddy's trying to break some of those. Leon looked across the room at Malcolm, who was serving gumbo to Mrs. Bell and listening as she explained that the city had finally answered her property complaint after 6 weeks of silence. Your father has been trying to break habits since before you were born, Leon said. Did you think he could? No. Annie waited. Leon added, I was wrong. That was as close to a speech as she expected from him. The evening filled slowly, not dramatically. People came in with envelopes, old deeds, tax letters, medical bills, business permits, questions about eviction notices, questions about wills, questions about whether a grandson with bad credit could still inherit a house if the paperwork was clean. Some came only to eat. Malcolm treated both groups the same. He moved through the room with coffee, plates, and quiet attention. He called older women ma'am. He called men by their names. He bent down to hear people who spoke softly, but he did not lower himself for anyone's cruelty anymore. Annie saw the difference now. Humility had a spine. Shame did not. At 8, Sarah brought out peach cobbler, and Mrs. Price tapped her spoon against her glass. "If this is a meeting, I demand order," she said. Sarah muttered, "Lord help us." Mrs. Price ignored her. "Last month, some of us nearly lost what our families spent decades building. Tonight, we are sitting here eating too much butter because people told the truth at the right time, so I propose a toast." Mr. Harlan raised his coffee. "To Annie." Annie froze. "No. Yes," Mrs. Price said. "Child, don't argue with older women in public. It makes you look poorly raised." A laugh moved through the room. Annie looked at Malcolm for help. He lifted his cup. Absolutely no help at all. Mrs. Price continued, "To Annie Carter, who reminded a rich man that money does not make him tall." "To Annie," the room said. Annie felt heat rise in her face. "I was defending my father." Mrs. Price nodded. "That is how some revolutions begin." Malcolm looked at Annie over the rim of his coffee cup. His eyes were warm, but there was something else there too. Gratitude, regret, pride, all of it, sitting together without needing to be sorted. Later, when the last plates had been cleared and the attorneys packed their bags, Annie found Malcolm in his office. The wooden box sat open on his desk. Simone's business card lay beside it. "Power is only beautiful when it protects someone." Annie leaned against the doorframe. "You okay?" "No." She smiled a little. "Good. I'd be worried if you said yes." He looked up. "You spend too much time with Sarah." "Everybody should." He picked up the card, then handed it to Annie. "I want you to keep this." She did not take it right away. "Daddy, that's Mom's." "Yes. So I give it to me, because I used to read it like it was written to stop me." His voice was quiet. "You read it like it is telling you where to go." Annie took the card carefully. "Are you sure?" "No," Malcolm said, "but I am learning not to confuse fear with wisdom." She ran her thumb over her mother's handwriting. Outside the office, the restaurant settled into closing sounds, chairs lifted onto tables, water running in the bar sink, Sarah telling Marcus that good shoes did not excuse slow side work. The ordinary noise felt like a blessing. Annie looked at her father. "Do you think people will forget what happened?" "Some will." "And Richard?" Malcolm leaned back. He resigned. The board cut him loose. The Auburn deal is dead. The review will take months. Men like Richard rarely disappear, but he will have fewer rooms willing to pretend they don't know him. That's not as satisfying as I expected. Justice rarely is. She frowned. That sounds depressing. It is honest. He stood and looked through the small office window toward the dining room. Revenge wants a clean ending. Justice usually leaves work behind. Annie thought about the oak table, the folders, Mrs. Bell's hands, Leon's quiet apology without apology, Sarah at the door, Mrs. Price turning supper into civic duty. "Then we keep working," she said. Malcolm smiled. "Yes." They turned off the office light together and walked through the restaurant. At the front, Annie paused by the table where Richard Whitmore had sat. It had been reset like every other table. Clean linen, 2 polished glasses, forks aligned, no stain, no trace of wine. But Annie remembered. So did the room. Malcolm stopped beside her. "What are you thinking?" She looked at the table, then at the photographs on the wall, then at the new oak table in the private room. "I'm thinking he came here to celebrate taking a neighborhood," she said, "and somehow he helped us protect one." Malcolm nodded. "Cruel men often reveal the door by trying to lock it." She glanced at him. "That one of yours?" "Your mother's, probably. I steal from the best." Annie laughed, and this time nothing caught in her throat. At the door, Sarah waited with the keys. "Are we having a family moment?" "Because I charge overtime for witnessing those." Malcolm took his coat from the hook. "Good night, Sarah. Good night, Mr. Carter. Good night, Annie." Annie looked back into the Carter house one last time. A month ago, she had thought the restaurant was her father's kingdom, polished and warm and built on recipes. Now she knew it was more than that. It was his apology, his promise, his shelter, a place made by a man who had once used fear and was still learning, every day, to use power differently. Outside, Atlanta moved under the streetlights, still complicated, still unfair, still full of men who mistook service for weakness and silence for consent. But inside the Carter house, something had been settled. Not finished. Settled. No one forgot the night Annie Carter threw down her towel and asked a billionaire if he had insulted her father. Not because a powerful man fell. Powerful men fall every day and call it weather. They remembered because a daughter stood, a father stayed, a room listened, and a community learned again that dignity does not need permission before it rises. Malcolm locked the door. Annie held her mother's card in her pocket. And behind the glass, in the warm dark of the Carter house, the tables waited for tomorrow. The lesson of this story is that dignity should never be mistaken for weakness, and silence should never be mistaken for fear. Malcolm Carter's quiet restraint was not surrender. It was the strength of a man trying to become better than his past. Annie's courage reminds us that one honest voice can force a room to face the truth. In the end, justice is not only about punishing the powerful, but about protecting the vulnerable, restoring dignity, and using power to serve people instead of crushing them. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.